Noon on a Monday. Admittedly, that feels kind of awkward to say. But good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook is here as well. Eddie Garrison, I decided, and this was the biggest disappointment of the weekend for me. Jimmy, I decided that Eddie Garrison, because he is the guy manning the ship here, right? He's the guy flying the ship. He is basically, I guess he'd be Han Solo. I don't think he wants to be Chewbacca. And so I decided that since he's a millennial, I'll call him the Millennial Falcon. And then I looked it up, and Eddie's too young to be. He's like Generation Z. Now, are you also Generation Z?
So it's a weird debate, I guess, between people that track that kind of thing. My age group, as a 28-year-old born in 95, is both. But I tend to float more in the millennial circles because Gen Z gets the rep of they don't pay attention to anything. They need everything right now.
No, neither do millennials.
But it's a little better. It's a little better. It's each generation, as you know, stoning the next generation.
Listen, I didn't realize that I'm Generation X. I mean, I guess I knew that once it became, that was the terminology used. But Generation X to me is like you're just forgotten about, right? You're like, we don't know what to do with you, which is actually part of the way I ended up here at noon, right? Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. That was the voice of Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison here as well. This is Query and Company, and we have a lot to talk about over the course of the next couple of hours. As a matter of fact, the big topic is going to be the Indianapolis Colts, obviously. Stephen Holder going to join us at 12:30, coming up in about 30 minutes, and then Bob Kravitz going to join us at 2 o'clock. Bob did a pretty interesting one-on-one interview with Peyton Manning in terms of Peyton Manning's viewpoint about the Colts situation at quarterback and Anthony Richardson being a young quarterback. It's hard to believe. And speaking of being Generation X, I mean, this is where I was like, wow. It was 25 years ago that Peyton Manning was a rookie for the Colts and, was basically thrown to the wolves. And he talked with Bob Kravitz about just that process. And you're talking about one of the great football minds in the history of the game and arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. So for him to talk about, I guess, some of the precautionary tales is pretty interesting. We'll talk to Bob about that at 2 o'clock. But before we get to all of that, Jimmy, first off, how was your weekend? Anything fun and exciting?
Nothing too crazy. Made more money with the Lionel Messi anytime goal scorer. If you have followed along with the station, we've been betting MLS heavily the last couple of weeks, so that was nice. And
1-800-9-WITH-IT.
If you have a gambling problem, that's always important. We got to get that disclaimer in there. And then, a good buddy of mine from high school, they just welcomed their first child into the world back in June. And so we met young Archie Kuntz for the first time. So,
Archie?
So that was my weekend. Yep.
Named after Archie Manning?
I don't believe so, okay. No. But it definitely wasn't named after Archie Miller. I can promise you that because he's a Purdue grad. Though maybe Fair it was, enough. Given how dominant Purdue was during that tenure.
So last night I went to the Big Head Todd and the Monsters and Blues Traveler concert at Rock the Ruins on Holiday Park, which, by the way, if you ever go to a concert, Rock the Ruins is super cool at Holiday Park. You can pay to park inside Holiday Park, or the guy that lives right across the street in Spring Mill, who's a genius, just parks people in his front yard for $20, and it's literally as close. That's the way to go, which is what we did. Did that last night. Obviously watched the Colts, kept up with it on Saturday of what was going on. And I do think, Jimmy, let's begin with this. The decision by the Colts to not start Anthony Richardson. I know it's a polarizing decision. I can see both sides of it that we'll get into. But first and foremost, tell me your thoughts on whether or not right call or wrong call by Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, Jim Irsay to not play Anthony Richardson.
My initial reaction was wrong call because the announcement came last week after Buffalo and Indianapolis faced off, and he didn't look particularly sharp. He looked fine. It was a mixed bag, as we called it last week. But I get that the announcement was to get a lot of things out of the way and to make it known that this is his job. We want him to get all the reps, want him to get all the starting experience, and he's our guy the rest of the 2023 campaign. It wasn't just one game that got him that job. But I also think that the biggest knock on him is the lack of experience, the lack of in-game reps. And while the philosophy in the league has shifted to joint practices are really the only thing that matters in the lead up to week one, I would have liked to have at least seen him out there for a quarter. That was my initial reaction. Then you read more and you see in-game that, Bears have mostly twos out there on the defensive end. The Colts offensive line is mainly backups out there. And so if they feel like that they got enough value out of the joint practices, like you said, I see both sides of it, but I would have liked to have seen him out there. And I think a lot of Colts fans that were in attendance there on Saturday. Would have also liked to have seen him in the lone home game they're going to get in the preseason.
I mean, you have a fairly quick turnaround, obviously, because now they go out to Philadelphia. I'm with you in the fact that I think you can go both ways with it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought this. And I do feel for fans of the Colts for the reason that to buy season tickets, you have to buy a preseason game. And so if you're asking the fans, and I don't know, I probably should have looked this up. Somebody can let me know. They can text me or give us a call. When you buy your season ticket package, is the preseason game less expensive than the regular season? I know that you have to buy, X number of games, and that is included in it. But if you're asking the season ticket holders to commit to the preseason as if it's the regular season, then at least in perception, it should appear as though the Colts are doing the same. Now, that's a little bit ludicrous because it's unfair to think that they're going to go out there and play, their starters the entire time. I mean, they've got to look at and evaluate guys pretty in depth and heavily. That's the point of the game. But so I get that reaction of people of like, look, I paid the money to see Anthony Richardson. He's not out there. What's going on? I get it. However, I think, Jimmy, the hardest thing to grasp is this, okay? You think to yourself, they need Anthony Richardson to play because he needs reps, right? They need Anthony Richardson to play because he needs experience. He only played 13 games in college. I get that, except for that this year has never been about Anthony Richardson playing in the preseason and getting up to speed is what you would do if you're trying to win, right? To win as soon as possible. They have no timeline on when to start winning. Their entire season is based on the growth and development of Anthony Richardson. And if they feel like keeping him guarded from the shell shock or the PTSD, let's say, of an experimental line, of a mismatched line that's playing in the preseason where you're trying to find out, maybe you got guys playing at different positions on the offensive line to see if they can give you depth at the guard or tackle position and they're a little bit out of position, or they don't have the camaraderie that you typically see from an offensive line. If those things if that's the case, then they have to look at it not in a vacuum but in totality and say, what is the best long-term thing here? And in that case, I can see why they said, look, he went through the camps with the Bears, or the practice with the Bears. He did all of that. He's going to play again here, and within a week, we'll let him sit and watch this one. And maybe they also looked at it and said, Gardner Minshew is a really good in-rhythm quarterback right now and is playing well, so let's let him just sit and watch that. Because I don't think, Jimmy, that this year's win total is in any way, shape, or form anything that the Colts are worried about.
From the team standpoint, it's the smarter decision to not throw him into a scenario where bad habits would initially form because he's working with a makeshift offensive line. I get all that, and I know the answer to my gripe here, but you brought up season ticket holders earlier. If I'm a season ticket holder and I'm thinking about investing time to go to a preseason game, because let's be honest, like, even if starters play, you're getting a quarter of action and then you're just watching a glorified tryout play out right in front of your eyes.
Right.
I would have liked to have known that information beforehand. I get why the Colts wouldn't share that, because then you risk having empty Lucas Oil. You're not getting the type of concession.
But if you've already sold the tickets, so I mean, you're not getting a huge walk-up, right?
But I might resell it, or I might not go if I was a Colts fan, because I want to do something else on my Saturday. I'm going to invest the next 17 Sundays to this team. I don't need to go to a preseason game unless it's the debut of Anthony Richardson at home.
Derek joins us to call in and set the record straight here on, I think Derek's a season. Derek, are you a season ticket holder?
Good afternoon. Yes, I am a season ticket holder. Been about 12 to 13 years.
Okay. So when you look at the totality of your cost of season tickets, is the preseason game the same across the board, or is it like prorated, so to speak? Is it less than a regular season game?
Well, I think when they added that extra game, they changed how they price it. It used to be, 8 regular season games?
Yeah, it used to be a perfect 10 games, right?
Yeah, and they were evenly priced. The face value was the same across all of them. But now they do dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing.
It's based off the opponent. So a better opponent.
Clemson does that in college football. Like my Clemson season tickets, Like, I have season tickets for Clemson, and the face value of the Florida State game is more than the face value of the Wofford game.
Right. So now the preseason games are, face value-wise, they're a little bit less expensive, but you're still paying the same amount regardless. But I generally don't go. I didn't expect AR to play at all. I usually give mine away or sell them if I can.
Okay, so here it says, I appreciate it, Derek. Alec just sent me a thing also saying the face value for his is 126 regular season, 44 for preseason. So in that regard, it kind of gives you less, like, complaint to stand on, right?
Yeah.
But aside from that, that's talking point number one. The thing that I found interesting, Jimmy Cook, is this. What are we talking about right now? What are people in Indianapolis talking about? What are local media people discussing about the Colts game against the Chicago Bears? What is the number one topic? The number one topic has been, should Anthony Richardson have played? Right?
Yep. By and large.
You know what we're not talking about? We are not talking about the fact that you have a running back in Jonathan Taylor that was not on the field. You have a running back in Jonathan Taylor that's still on the PUP list and could start the season on the PUP list. And if you really want to look at what's in the best interest of Anthony Richardson, what's in the best interest of Anthony Richardson is to have him surrounded by as many offensive weapons as possible. But Jonathan Taylor's looking at it saying, I'm an offensive weapon that I'm trying to do two things. I'm trying to probably compete because I've been here a few years now, and I'm trying to showcase what I can do in order to get paid. And I think that standoff is no closer than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. Jim Irsay goes on the television broadcast and basically says, look, you know, we love Jonathan. I mean, it's kumbaya, right? Jimmy, my concern is this. We got 3 guys sitting in here right now, right? We have me, you, and Eddie.
Yep.
Now, if I said to you guys, and this is unlikely because I just got up like 45 minutes ago, but if I had said to you guys, like, hey, let's meet downtown and have lunch before the show, I might say, let's go get a slice. You might say, no, I want to go to the mall and get a steak and cheese. Eddie feels like Jimmy John, whatever. 3 different people, 3 different opinions. I feel like when it comes to the Jonathan Taylor situation, and this was my concern with the Colts about a number of different things over the last few years. I don't know this. I'm not accusing them of it. I'm simply speculating about it. It feels like the brass of the Colts, you have 3 people with 3 different approaches or opinions. Shane Steichen's job is to get the Colts prepared this year to start moving in the right direction with a young quarterback, right? Shane Steichen's focus is on the quarterback. So if you were to ask Shane Steichen about Jonathan Taylor, his answer probably, if you put truth serum in him, is probably like, yeah, I'd like to have the guy because it takes heat off of my quarterback, and my long-term future is hitched to the hip of number 5, right? Jim Irsay, if you were to ask him, is like, we love Jonathan Taylor. I want him here. I mean, Jonathan's, you know, like that guy, you know, he's got potential. He's like a LaDainian Tomlinson, you know. I mean, and so Irsay wants him here because Irsay wants the image and the perception and the league-wide reputation that this is a place where players want to play and they take care of each other, and it's about the horseshoe, and it's about representing the shoe and being a family and whatever else. So Irsay wants Jonathan Taylor in the mix. It's in his best interest.
To a point, right? The dollar sign of it all.
Well, of course. But he's under contract.
Yes.
And Irsay knows
Correct.
He's under contract.
Correct.
And Irsay can franchise tag him next year.
He's got everything in his court. Yeah.
Ballard, on the other hand, is the one guy that if you put truth serum in him, I'm not speaking for Chris Ballard definitively. I'm speaking for what Jake Query would feel if Jake Query was in Chris Ballard's situation. And so I assume that this is the case with Chris Ballard because we haven't heard Chris Ballard talk a lot about it. If you're Chris Ballard, you're thinking to yourself, I got to see what I can get for him. Chris Ballard knows that his job is attached at the hip of Shane Steichen, which is attached at the hip of Anthony Richardson. In the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon game for Chris Ballard, Jonathan Taylor is not in the first 3 degrees. It is for Jim Irsay because of what it means for his franchise and the reputation. But if I'm Chris Ballard, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I've been here a half dozen years. We haven't made a playoff run. I'm on my, for all intent and purposes, probably third attempt at quarterback because they thought they'd get more than 1 year out of Rivers. They certainly thought Wentz he pushed all in on Carson Wentz. It imploded. Irsay wasn't happy about it. Ballard gets another lease, and now it's starting with Anthony Richardson. Jimmy, would you agree? If you're Chris Ballard, you're interested. You want to know if you want to make sure that you're not bypassing an opportunity to parlay Jonathan Taylor into assets, right?
That has to be on the top of mind. But also, if you were to go further down that interrogation, I think it would lead to fear of, I don't think we're going to get anything for him. So I look around the league, I don't have an interest in acquiring Jonathan Taylor for two reasons. One, it's effectively a 1 year rental with a headache because this contract dispute's not going away. Like next year, he's going to not want to play on a tag. He's going to want to get an extension that is above market value. And two, if it is a rental, how much am I willing to gamble away in assets where A, it's worth it for the trading team, and B, for Ballard, where I'm not looking like I got fleeced?
Well, like
if it's a fifth rounder for Jonathan Taylor, no thanks. Like I'm fine.
But it's better than nothing. I mean, if you are, I get it. And I'm speaking a little more in NBA terms here.
Sure.
But if you're Chris Ballard, you have to look at it and say, they're probably going to tag him for a year. But if you have Jonathan, and then at that point, probably if you can't come to terms, then he walks. But if you're Ballard, Chris Ballard has built this franchise incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris Ballard last year, for the first time, I'll give him credit. For the first time last year, Jimmy, at the end of the year, Chris Ballard. So when I go to, a couple of years ago, I get asked, Jake, will you come out and speak to some students at North Central, which is where I went to school? Otherwise, there's no reason they'd have me go speak to students there. So I go to North Central and I walk in and I'm like, I'm thinking that I'm going to do like career day. And they're like, no, we want to do like an assembly. Okay? With there's 500 kids. I go, well, how long do you need me to speak? They go, well, we're going to bring in 500, I'm exaggerating, but they're like, we're going to have you do 4 straight classes. So 4 hours. I'm like, I can't do 3 hours, let alone 4, right? So I go, okay. So I come up with, they want me to talk about what works in the real world. So I come up with what I call for students, you got to get your PhD, okay? And of course, they're all like, a doctorate? For those that know what a PhD is. And I'm like, no. PhD stands for persistence, humility, and then digital imaging, which is a really important thing for young people today because they're putting everything online and it sticks with you forever.
Mm-hmm.
But the H in that humility, and this is me telling this to kids, right? So consider the source. But I do think that humility is a really important trait and characteristic for people to have. And last year, for the first time at the end of the season, Chris Ballard, who had shown a lot of persistence in the way that he was building a team that was the antithesis of the way that most NFL teams were built. But Chris Ballard finally showed humility. And I think actually fans appreciated it. As a media member, I did. That he came out and said, for all the times that Chris Ballard, quite frankly, belittled people and kind of laughed at people or was just smug in general about knowing more about building a franchise than they did. Jimmy, one of the things that people were pushing in on Chris Ballard about was you've got to go out and get wideouts. We have the famous sound clip of him talking about Kevin Bowen and wideouts, for example. You know, Kevin, he knew more than Kevin. Like, why are you always talking about wideouts? And then at the end of last year, they weren't able to throw the ball because they didn't have, other than Michael Pittman, like consistent wideouts, right?
Mm-hmm.
He built the team. Chris Ballard built the Colts by putting emphasis and money in areas that the rest of the NFL have moved away from. I've always said if Ballard was building an NBA team, his first 3 players he'd have would be Dikembe Mutombo, Dale Davis, and Sam Cassell, which was really good in 1998, right?
Yeah.
But not so much today. And so I think that I think that last year he showed humility and realized and learned that if he's going to get another lease on building this franchise and building this roster, he's going to have to get away from doing it his way and start doing it more the NFL way, which is why he went out and got a potentially dynamic, with the legs, playmaking quarterback, as opposed to a rooted statue that can throw the ball to wideouts that he hasn't gone out and gotten. And with that, Jimmy, I think that Ballard realized that one of the things that you have to shy away from is putting too much financial investment in the areas that don't get you return on investment, and that would be running back. So for Ballard, for me, it would be less about what he can get back in a trade or whatever else, and more about avoiding giving too much capital and too much financial investment into a position that in reality you can pay 20% that price and get 70% the production. And that's the crutch he's in, right? That's the crutch is the wrong word. Sorry. That's the crux that he's in, right? Like if I'm Ballard, that's keeping me awake. Like, how do I get out of this situation? Particularly knowing that my owner is now publicly stating that he wants Jonathan Taylor in the mix because my owner does not want the reputation for the rest of the league that he's an owner that's difficult to play for. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the challenge in all of it. But the one thing that I think, if you are the Colts, that you're happy about, weird way of saying it, for this particular game is we at least moved the needle on what we're talking about. We shifted what we're talking about. It was a shell game, right?
Well, it started last week with, whether or not you believe the Colts on it or not, it started last week when the conversation tides changed when he was named the starter. And then all the last week has been the lead up to that preseason game, and is he going to play? And yeah, it caught me by surprise. I thought for certain he would play just because you get more reps out of it, but you're right, it's a long-term game. My thing is, it's less about the reps and more just, I want him to make as many mistakes as he can as early as he can so that the film's there, so they can adapt with it, and hopefully he learns and grows from it. Can that still happen in week one? Absolutely. I do totally agree with you, though, that from a philosophical standpoint, if this happened a year earlier, Chris Ballard would have made Jonathan Taylor the highest paid running back in the league.
Right.
Like I
totally agree.
No doubt about that.
Totally agree.
If you went the true serum route again, you asked him that, he would be the highest paid running back in the NFL. But at some point, you have to have a check with reality moment where you realize that you're either going to be out of a job in a couple of years if you keep team building this way, or you need to adapt on the fly. And there's a lot of hype around Josh Downs, and I don't fault Alec Pierce for last year because it's tough to make it in the NFL as a rookie wide receiver. I know it's the same boat Downs is in right now, but you're hopeful that you've hit on these last two receivers you've taken in the draft.
Downs does show some things.
Right. And there's no longer, hopefully anyway, with where this franchise is going, there's no longer a fear of who is throwing the football to them. The accuracy issues are still there, but the hope is there's finally continuity, and it's not Matt Ryan or just Carson Wentz or anybody.
See, here's the thing. Let me show you a problem, Jimmy. Okay, you and I have known each other now for 24 minutes, right? We met for the first time in the hallway about 25 minutes ago, right? I was walking in, you're like, I'm Jimmy, and I'm like, oh, I'm Jake, and that was it, right?
Yep. But
the one thing about you that I love in knowing you now for 25 minutes, you can't even say Carson Wentz's name without laughing.
No, I can't.
Because
it was as dark a day as, like, you can say what you want about last year. Like, I really did want to believe Matt Ryan was going to work because of how bad Wentz was. Like, like a lot of people wanted Ryan to work because it made sense from a football standpoint at the time. Mine was just, thank goodness it's somebody but that guy.
You mentioning Carson Wentz makes me think of that 6 a.m. show all over again, the Way Too Early pregame show, Jimmy.
Oh, man.
Where we broke into the studio.
Yeah, broke into the studio, hijacked the airways, and given Colts an early taste at 6 or 7 in the morning of what they were going to expect from a Wentz Sunday.
You guys were in here at 6 o'clock in the morning?
Yep.
It's brutal, isn't it?
On a Sunday.
I will tell you this. I've never been in here at 6 in the morning. I've been in at 7 a few times. I've never been in at 6. You know, I mean, 7's rough enough, man. But, you know, Wentz, there were so many things that went into it, right? And a big part of Carson Wentz's drop off in Indianapolis, I think he never recovered from the injury in Philly.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, and I know that people don't want to hear it, and I don't want to get into, you know, we know obviously there was stuff that took place away from football, but I just think Carson Wentz had kind of like this almost aloof nature about him where he wasn't totally in touch with the perceptions and just the locker. There are guys on that roster that loved him.
Yeah.
But there were people in the down the hallway that did not. And that right there, and he seemingly was like unaware of that at all times. But regardless, Chris Ballard knows, okay, I got a fresh start. The Etch-a-Sketch was completely wiped clean, and I want to make sure that when I'm turning these knobs that I don't get two of the lines that intersect each other like they did before. And that, I think, all goes into we as human beings naturally proceed with things somewhat based on the experiences we've had before. And I think that Ballard now is going in a different direction based on his previous experiences. And that, as a result, means that he wants to explore more options when it comes to Jonathan Taylor than does Jim Irsay. And I think there's a reason, historically speaking, for Jim Irsay that he wants Jonathan Taylor in the mix. And I had a conversation Friday night that validated that theory. We'll get into that on the other side after we talk to Stephen Holder. The ESPN.com writer is going to join us, and he's going to join us next here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
How'd you like to free up some serious cash?
12:30 on a Monday. Good afternoon to you. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, the other voice you hear on this program. Eddie Garrison, who looks like he's getting ready to go to a Blue Friday tailgate, is manning the ship for us. The rest of the company, if you will, that is hanging out so far here today, Nick Cottingem, whose last name I can never totally pronounce, is in here helping us out with the web. Graham is hanging out, shadowing. And joining us now, and I'm thrilled that he is doing so, actually, because not only do I think he's very tied in with the Colts, but he's become kind of an off-radio pal of mine as well. And when they came to me and asked me if I would on this day want to take over on the midday show helping things out, I thought, well, who would I want as my first guest? David Letterman's first guest was Bill Murray. And so if I'm doing a new show here, I thought, who would I like as a first guest? And so, therefore, from ESPN.com, Stephen Holder, let me be the first to welcome you to Middays on the Fan as a guest. How are you?
It's an honor. I mean, I have had a lot of honors bestowed upon me. Not a lot, a few. Okay, like two in my lifetime, but this is definitely one of the biggest.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay. Well, the plaque's in the mail.
Seriously, it's really cool. I'm glad you're getting a chance to do this for sure.
So let's begin with this, Stephen. I think the big thunder coming out of the game against Chicago, the first is, and I'm not going to say that it was by design, but if I'm the Colts, I probably am enjoying the reprieve of the constant analysis and scrutiny of what's going on with Jonathan Taylor by people now talking about whether or not Anthony Richardson should have played. So let's begin with the Taylor story. Is there anything new in terms of the developments of when Jonathan Taylor could return to the field?
Not that we know of. Now, whether there's been some conversations behind closed doors that have happened that could change the course of this, that I'm not privy to right now, nor does it seem anyone else is. We haven't heard that. But I do think it's at least incremental to know, or it's incrementally important, I guess, that Jonathan Taylor, we believe, has returned from his most recent absence and will be accompanying the team to Philadelphia this week. Now, I don't want people to make too much of that because Jim Irsay was talking the other night on the broadcast, and the terms in which he was talking, it sounded to some people as if, oh, well, maybe this thing is settled. I don't think that's the case. I think he was talking in terms of what he wants to happen and what he wants to be the outcome. And so when he says, we're happy to have Jonathan Taylor back, well, yeah, in theory, but I don't think this thing is necessarily settled. Now, last thing I'll say is with each day that passes here, I think it's becoming clear that the options for Jonathan Taylor do start to dwindle here because time was on his side initially. Time is much less on his side now.
When are we going to get clarity, Stephen, on, I don't want to say the legitimacy of him being on the PUP, but where is the fork in the road where we learn if he's really still hurt and might be in danger of missing week 1 because of that versus the holdout is still ongoing?
Well, the only way, based on the way they've conducted themselves so far, the Colts, the only way we'll know anything, sort of concrete is when they make a roster move of some kind. And they say he stays on the PUP list at the final roster cut, for example. That's just for argument's sake, right? Or if he gets activated, right? And then we know then you're deemed to be healthy. But other than that, I think it has to come from Jonathan Taylor. And that's the issue. We haven't heard from Jonathan Taylor, and that's his prerogative. I mean, players who are on PUP don't tend to hold press conferences and talk to the media a whole lot. So that is standard operating procedure. I don't want to make a big deal about that, but certainly he could clear this up and could answer some very specific questions that Shane Steichen clearly is not going to answer. He's been the only voice on this, Shane Steichen, and he has taken the approach, understandably to some extent, like, hey, I'm going to worry about who's on the field, and the Taylor stuff will take care of itself. Of course, that's not a good enough answer for people, and certainly not for me as an inquisitive reporter, but that's what we have for now, and that's why I think really the clarity is going to have to come from Jonathan Taylor eventually.
Stephen, somewhere out there is a player that yesterday, midway through the day, woke up and said, I'm trying my hardest to make the roster of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm really pleased with what I did Saturday night in order to try to cement my spot on the roster of the Indianapolis Colts. And I wish more people would have noticed, but everybody was talking about Anthony Richardson or Jonathan Taylor. And I wish they would have noticed that I actually had a pretty decent game. That player would be who?
Well, that would require me actually watching the game, Jake. I don't know. I did my best not to watch.
Regent Bryan's going to come after you, man. Let me tell you something, Stephen. Regent Bryan, last year I made the mistake of going to the Yuletide with my family as a Christmas tradition. Instead of watching a 3-win team take on the Minnesota Vikings, Regent Bryan's never let me forget about it. So here you are, a nationally esteemed writer for a national outlet, and you admit a preseason game you didn't watch all of it, right?
No, listen, in all seriousness, look, I would say, listen, I don't know if this guy's going to make the team, okay? But James Washington had that big play there. And it's interesting because there now is this huge – and he was just signed, I believe, like Thursday, Friday?
Yeah, I mean, like he first met the team like on the bus ride, right?
It was pretty crazy, right? And so he comes in and makes a play. And the reason I bring him up is not because, like, that was enough necessarily. That play is enough. I'm not suggesting that. What I am saying, though, is there is – like all of a sudden this huge opportunity at wide receiver. And I know, when Ashton Doolin gets hurt, people maybe don't make a huge deal about that, but there's like there's a real drop off, I feel like, after the fourth receiver. And if they keep 5, people are talking about 6. I think the question is, do they keep 5? And they will, but I mean, who's the 5th, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, is it possible, Stephen, that James Washington, because for those that are unfamiliar, former second-round pick, went to the Steelers, out of Oklahoma State, smaller guy, like kind of a Paris Campbell-type mold, if I'm not mistaken, kind of a similar style as, say, an Amari Rodgers, maybe more of a deep ball threat than Amari Rodgers, who's more of a bubble screen guy. But is it possible that those are the two that would be battling for one spot?
Yeah, and then you also have, there's a few guys. I mean, there's Rashard Perryman, but has he had a great camp? I don't know. And then I think you have guys like Michael Strawn, like what's his situation? And what is – so the problem with Strawn is I know a lot of people like him, but he doesn't play a lot of special teams. And you heard Shane Steichen the other night, in fact, after the game when he was asked about the fourth, or excuse me, the last couple wide receiver spots. When he was asked about that, he was asked, what would be the deciding factor, and he went right to special teams involvement being, kind of a deciding factor there. So I think that's going to be an issue for all of those guys. They're all going to have to ask themselves whether they're an asset in the kicking game. Because if you're not, then there's not really an opportunity for you to be active on game day, and then the question becomes, well, then why are you here? so that's going to be the issue for those guys, and that's why the Ashton Doolin injury, while certainly not a huge headline around the country, that's why him getting injured complicates things, because there was no question with him. He can return, he can go out and cover kicks, he can do all that stuff. So you can have a guy like that active on game day. And even if he doesn't play a snap on offense, he has value.
ESPN Stephen Holder joins us. Shane Steichen had pushed back post-game when asked about Anthony Richardson, emphasizing the value of joint practices and all the reps that he got with the joint practices with the Bears. Are we led to then believe, or at least surmise, that since there's joint practices with the Eagles upcoming, we likely won't see Richardson in the preseason finale?
No, actually, I did press him a little bit on it, and I thought on maybe a second and third attempt to get some clarity, he kind of opened the door to the starters playing more extensively next week, or I guess this week, I should say. I would say now, having heard that, I think they will play some. And here's why. I think here's why it might make sense if you look at it from the Colts' perspective. Okay, they had a long week last week, 2 really intense practices. I thought they got really good work. And then you go into that game, and that is not typical, but it's common, right, in a situation like that to not play your starters. Now, this week, they've got only 1 practice in Philly, and then they've got the preseason game on Thursday, and then they've got a couple weeks. So I think what I presume, I guess, is that Shane Steichen didn't want to have a long week last week, then also play some starters on Saturday and then go into travel in a short week this week, that would pretty much preclude you at all from playing them this week. So I don't know. It's just a different approach. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. But you weren't going to play starters in all 3 games. That's very unlikely. So I think that this will be the week that they do play. So, and that's the thing. I mean, this is the first time going through all of these things with Shane Steichen. So we're still learning what his approach is. Maybe next year this will be a little clearer.
Steven, you ever seen those commercials where Baker Mayfield lives inside the stadium?
I remember Baker Mayfield. He used to be an NFL quarterback. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Before he became a vagabond. If you've been in, like me, I would assume you've been in the vast majority of NFL stadiums over your career. If you had to live in one, which one would you pick?
This is a good one. Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta's pretty nice, I got to say.
I mean, Jerry World's got to have a lot of amenities, right?
And including, by the way, a bear spigot in the that's not a spigot. What do you call it? That's God. Did I really say that? A tap in the press box. So, good call. Actually, good call. And by the way, if you wander around Jerry World or just get lost like I have in Jerry World, you're going to at some point run into the those field level suites that you sometimes see on television. They are amazing, okay? They are amazing.
I mean, there's a reason he's made billions of dollars off that deal, right?
That's right. I've also sort of ventured around Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, and I would say those field-level suites there, they're pretty nice, too. Like, I could get comfortable down there. So, we've come a long way, right? Had I gotten lost in, just to take it back to my childhood, had I gotten lost in, the Orange Bowl, or gotten stuck, I should say, in the Orange Bowl, you would want to die.
Yeah, the Orange Bowl's a total dump, right? I think I told you. I've told this story many times, Stephen. I don't know if I told you, but when you were talking about just walking around the bowels of a stadium, I did that at Aloha Stadium during the Pro Bowl one year. I was looking for I've
been there.
Yeah, it total cookie cutter stadium, right? But it was before the Pro Bowl, and I was looking for the restroom, and they're like, well, there's a down the hallway. And I went down, and I went into an auxiliary locker room, and all of the mascots were in there, most of them with their heads off, and the Patriot and Dolphin were sharing a cigarette. And for a lot of people, that would be traumatizing forever, right?
Right.
I found it kind of cool, to be honest with you. The camaraderie of the AFC East of chugging down a lung dart together was kind of fun, right?
It was like Santa and his elves, just kind of sitting around sharing a cigarette.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to walk in on. I'm like, don't mind me, fellas, just looking for the restroom. Okay, last question, Stephen. It might be a loaded one. Do you believe when it comes to the Taylor situation, which, let's be real, in terms of, I don't know how much drama there is with it, but certainly it's a bit of a distraction. Do you believe that Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, and Jim Irsay are all on the same page in terms of how to handle it and the approach with Jonathan Taylor's discontent?
I think it does seem that way. I think the team's perspective, from all appearances, is that they want to kind of wait this out and hope he comes around and he plays this year, and then we handle next year. That is their hope. And frankly, I think Jim Irsay reinforced that the other night when he said, if you recall in his comments on the broadcast, he said, we love Jonathan and we can't wait to have him back. And I still say that timing is everything. That is a reference to a contract resolution. Timing is everything, meaning this is not the time. So the answer hasn't changed. Okay, the answer hasn't changed, nor do they seem to be in a hurry to trade him, which has certainly been something that's been discussed. So, yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they think this is going to go, it appears, that they think this is going to go the way they intend it to. And that is becoming more likely, by the way, with each passing day.
Stephen, we appreciate the time, as always. Look forward to talking to you again. Colts and Eagles now, the joint workouts together, and then preseason game number 3. Appreciate the time today, and thankfully, I guess we didn't wake you up, right?
Yeah, there's that. That's good.
Appreciate it, Stephen.
I'll see you soon. All right,
Stephen Holder from ESPN.com. When we come back, I had mentioned that I do think that there might be something that is weighing into the thought process for Jim Irsay throughout this preseason storyline when it comes to the Taylor situation, and I serendipitously got into a conversation Friday night that I think might have kind of cemented my thought process. I'll explain all that and as well something to talk about at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway coming up in just a little bit. It is Query and Company. I feel like I should just say Query and Cook today, right? Jimmy, you're here. Eddie's here.
We're a group package. We're company. We're part of it. We're happy to be your first company members.
Well,
here.
I'm happy to have you
Reporting
guys.
for duty.
Happy to have you guys as the company men. Query and Company here, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. Eddie Garrison must have been at my parents' house last night playing Hot Blooded. I stopped by my parents' house. My dad is going to be mortified that I mentioned this. He was like, do you think we're not hip? Or are you going to tell all your friends on the radio that we're not hip? I'm like, no, Dad. People will relate. I am very fortunate to have both of my parents still here. They're both in great health. They are fabulous people and a true gift. But I stopped by their house last night, and of course, I'm automatically their IT help. I walk in and my mom's got like 7 tablets and an iPhone that she's like, can you get the email on this and get the Candy Crush off this one and onto this one? And I'm like, okay. So I'm trying to get things put onto my parents' phone, Jimmy, and I'll give them credit. They had the passwords, but it was, I'm like, well, I need the password for this. Well, which password's that? Well, I need your email password. Well, is that the Apple password? No, that's the Apple password. Well, which one's the email password? The email password's to your email. Well, my email's Apple. Okay.
I'm just trying to envision you in a Best Buy and a Geek Squad.
That's exactly.
And
I am the least technological savvy person on the planet. I know how to do 2 things: push a microphone on, push a microphone off. I do both of those at 60% efficiency. But I'm sitting there at my parents' house trying to do this, and finally, I realize that I'm getting impatient, and I'm getting upset, and I'm getting clammy. And then I say to my mom, "Where is your thermostat?" So I go into my parents' living room. They have their thermostat set. Not what the actual temperature is. Their desired setting on their thermostat, 81 degrees.
Oh, I was gonna guess 80, man.
With a 70% humidity.
I saw that on
Right?
Twitter or X or whatever the heck we're calling it.
I'm like, well, what are we doing here?
Where do you set it at normally?
Me?
Yes.
When I go to a hotel and I walk into a hotel room, the first thing I do, 66 degrees instantly. And then I leave for the day and I come back. Now, I was in a hotel room in Edmonton, Alberta. If you've ever been to Edmonton, it's sunny there in the summer, 20 hours a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
My room, I walked in, it's an inferno. It was like 80 degrees. I go down to the front desk. Listen, you got to do something about my air conditioning. Oh, we'll look at it. Okay, I'm going to be at the racetrack all day. I'll be back at 5. Come back at 5. There's now, the air conditioning is not working, but there's a folding mattress in the middle of the room. So I call down to the front desk and I'm like, I thought you were going to fix my air conditioning. Oh, no. We thought you said you needed a hideout mattress. No, it's like 95 degrees in my room. So I said, well, can you switch me to another room? Because the air conditioning's broke. Of course, they hardly use air conditioning up there, right? I'm like, you're 600 miles north of Helena, Montana. And I'm like, can you at least get me like something to cool off the room? Well, no, and unfortunately, we're booked. We have no other rooms. So I took the mattress down to the front desk, unfurled it right there, got the sheets out, fluffed the pillow, laid down, and they're like, what in the world are you doing? I'm like, I'm sleeping down here because it's cooler down here. And 15 minutes later, I was in like a 3-bedroom suite. It was the most fabulous thing ever. So there is a lesson to be learned. But my parents, 81 degrees in their house. I hope they're doing okay today. I have thought with this Jonathan Taylor situation, and I know that I've made reference to it, and I totally get that it's a dated reference, okay? But Jim Irsay is a Colts historian. And the point where Jim Irsay is not only a Colts historian, at times I think Jim Irsay he doesn't even understand some of the things that are historic and rather thinks of them as current. Like the Colts make the AFC title game and he has Raymond Barry come out. And I'm like, yeah, nobody in Indianapolis is aware of the contributions of a Hall of Fame receiver from Baltimore, right? So Jim Irsay is very in touch with not only his franchise, but the inner workings of his franchise. And Jim Irsay was the general manager of the Indianapolis Colts when he went and watched the workouts of Jeff George coming out of Illinois, and Jeff George threw like an 80-yard pass in his Letterman's jacket, and Irsay walked up to him and said, we are going to make you the number 1 player selected in the draft. They didn't have the number 1 pick, but Irsay said, we're going to take you number 1 overall. So they trade Andre Rison, Chris Hinton, and a couple of other picks to Atlanta for the rights of number 1 in 1990. They select Jeff George. They had 2.5 years prior to that made the trade for Eric Dickerson. So Irsay is now like, okay, I've got the $1 million arm. I've got the $1 million running back. And then they got Ron Meyer and decided to run the wishbone for a little bit, and it was kind of weird. But nonetheless, Dickerson became a malcontent. I'm not saying Jonathan Taylor's a malcontent, but Dickerson in Jeff George's second year, so Jeff George comes in, he's got no receiver to throw to because they traded Andre Rison. He's got no protection on the line. His first ever huddle he walks into, one of the offensive linemen, I won't say any names, throws up on himself. And George says after the 3 and out, George goes to the sidelines and goes, I am so glad that like somebody else is as nervous as I am. And the lineman says, oh no, dude, I'm still drunk from last night. True story. So, but at any rate, Dickerson's inability to be there for Jeff George early in Jeff George's career, I have always felt like stunted Jeff George because it put all of the attention on George himself from a defensive standpoint, and just there was drama, and it never allowed George to get his footing as a quarterback. And I think Jim Irsay has to be aware of that. And when Jim Irsay comes out and talks up Jonathan Taylor and how much he loves him, I think it's because he wants to make sure that Jonathan Taylor feels welcomed and loved here, because he worries that a Jonathan Taylor holdout or drama show will in fact be an impediment to Anthony Richardson. And Friday night, I go to dinner, and I'm leaving dinner, and I'm walking out, and sitting outdoor on the patio is Jeff George with his brother. And I've known Jeff for a long time, and I love Jeff George. But we talked briefly, you know, he's eating dinner, right? And I'm leaving. So it's, hey, what's going on? And he says to me, man, I'll tell you what, I worry about the situations that they're putting Anthony Richardson in. And I said, Jeff, I think about the Dickerson situation. And I know Rick Venturi made a very good point when we talked to Venturi about it. The difference between Dickerson and Taylor is that Dickerson was openly defying what was asked of him within the X's and O's. Taylor hasn't done that. But Jeff basically said, yeah, it was difficult for me, and I think Jeff would be the first to admit that he made mistakes as well. But there just wasn't, Jimmy, any solidarity around him to help him get his footing. And I think that Irsay has to be aware of that, because Jeff George is a long time ago to a lot of people. It's not to Jim Irsay. And I think that has to come into his mind. It has to come into his thought process. And the Taylor situation, I think that's part of why. I mean, Jimmy, didn't you think, I don't know if you heard Irsay's comments with Rick Venturi, but he was very gushing about Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it wasn't like, hey, we need to get this resolved. I mean, it was, he's a horseshoe guy and we want him here. And he was saying all the right things. And I think part of that is because it's as much about Jonathan Taylor as it is for him about Jeff George. And what took place with that. By the way, Jeff's going to join us on the show tomorrow, so he can further elaborate on, there are only 3 quarterbacks in this franchise history, truly. You can throw Chris Chandler in there, but in terms of day one expectation, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Jeff George, those are the 3 guys that know what Anthony Richardson's going through. Peyton Manning did a Q&A with Bob Kravitz. Bob's going to join us in an hour. We'll get that side of it, and then Jeff George can give us his side as well. And then we're going to go to Mass Ave on bikes and try to find Andrew Luck, and we'll go 3 for 3. When we come back, some sad news at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway I wanted to touch on in terms of a passing and the loss of one of the legendary names at IMS. We'll get to that. Bob Kravitz in an hour. It is Query and Company. Did I get the name right, Eddie? Query and Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. than I am? You're more hip. I just told you 60% of the time I remember to push that button. You're more hip than I, Jimmy, so let me ask you. Three Doors Down, cool, not cool?
Outside of this song, not cool. And even then, this is a certain era.
A couple of
music.
other bands that I'm curious if they're cool or not cool. Nickelback, not cool, right?
Not cool.
Okay,
Cool to hate on.
I disagree there.
Cool to
I
hate
like
on.
Nickelback.
What's that?
I like Nickelback.
Cool to hate on.
How about
Like Coldplay.
Creed is done, right? They had like a 2-month window.
Yeah.
Okay, Coldplay.
Largely soul yodelers are out of the lexicon. That would be Creed. That would be Nickelback. That would be long lane of artists.
Big Head Todd and the Monsters. You guys are probably both unfamiliar, right?
No idea.
They were great last night.
Zero
Good show.
clue. Zero clue.
They have 3 songs you'd know. Mid-90s, kind of back when, like, indie rock, if you want to call it that. I don't mean indie like Indianapolis, but independent rock. But they were good last night. They are from Denver. As a matter of fact, Shannon, my girlfriend's brother, played Little League Baseball with Big Head Todd.
Really?
Yeah. He was a second baseman. It was hard to get one into the gap because of his big head, truth be told.
Why do you have Clemson season tickets?
That's an excellent question, Jimmy. I shall opine. Are you ready?
Yes.
I was going to say, do you want the long answer? And then I thought, well, hell, we got to go till 3. So when I was a kid, I grew up a huge Indiana fan. I was a huge IU fan. Neither of my parents, my mom went to IU very briefly. My dad went to Indiana Central, now University of Indianapolis, very briefly. But all I knew when I was a kid was when I turned on the television, their jersey said Indiana, and I knew I lived in Indiana, so I was an Indiana fan. But, I mean, I literally was 94% of people that went to Washington Township schools between 1983 and 1991 hate Indiana because of me. I was that obnoxious a fan. I was interning at Channel 6 as a younger person for Ed Sorensen, and Ed said to me one day, Jake, if you're going to be a sportscaster, you have to learn objectivity. You cannot be a fan of the teams you cover. And it was never by design, Jimmy, that I never said to myself, like, I have to be a sportscaster in Indy. But he said, you need to wean yourself from fandom so that you can have an actual objectivity. And I said, okay. And he said, so pick a team that you'll likely never cover and let that be your fandom. Let that be your outlet. Well, when I was a kid, we would vacation in Hilton Head, and my mom, we would go to the Piggly Wiggly.
Nice.
Or the Winn-Dixie. And my mom would allow us like one junk food for the week. That was part of the thrill of vacation. And one year I got a 6-pack of Clemson orange soda that had the paw on it. So I always kind of liked Clemson. So when Ed said this to me, I said, I've always kind of liked Clemson. And I came into work like 3 days later, and he had sitting there a huge Clemson sweatshirt on the desk. And he goes, there you go. That's your team. So I started really following them at that point, and I would get satellite coordinates and watch. This is back before you could watch every game.
Sure.
Right? So at any rate, I bought season tickets one year. I just thought, I'm going to buy season tickets for Clemson. Now, this is crazy. 2015, I think, or 2016, I bought 2 season tickets for Clemson. It was $640 for the pair for the season for Clemson. Indiana was like $750. It was more to have season tickets for Indiana football than Clemson football. So I bought season tickets, and because I was a season ticket holder, yes, I'm going way too long on your simple question, but because I was a season ticket holder, that allowed me to buy. You know, when you go to a visiting team, you're a fan of what team? I know you're a Chiefs fan, but like
Notre Dame.
Okay, so Notre Dame. So have you been to games at Notre Dame?
Yes.
So if you go to a Notre Dame game and they're playing Michigan State, there's like one section usually in the upper level of the Michigan State fans, right? So because I was a Clemson season ticket holder, I had the ability to buy tickets in that section at Louisville one year. So I went down to Louisville by myself and was intentionally seated in the top row. I like to sit in the very top row of stadiums when I go to games sometimes, with no one around me. And there was one other guy in the row in front of me that was doing the same thing as I, and he was like pacing the whole time. So we just started talking over the course of the game. And so I told him I'm a season ticket holder from Indianapolis, and he's like, wait a minute, what? So I told him, and he said, well, listen, why don't you take down my number, and the next time you come to a game, text me, and let's get together ahead of time and, tailgate, whatever. So I did. And then he said, listen, I went to Clemson. My brother went to Clemson. My dad went to Clemson. My law partner went to Clemson. He's like, I have 12 season tickets and have had for 30 years. And I always have a couple of people that can't go to the game. So next year, instead of buying season tickets, you just pick the couple of games you want to come to, text me ahead of time, and I'll set aside 2 of them for you. And I have been to 35 games with him.
That's awesome.
Over the years. Tony Harbin's his name. Great dude. Lives in big attorney in Anderson, South Carolina. And like Tony and Diana and their son Chance, they're like family to me. So I go down there and it's great. Love them. So that's how I became a Clemson. So technically I'm not a season ticket holder. Tony is, and then I buy his tickets. Speaking of travels, Jimmy, you've been to Texas, right?
I have.
You've been to Dallas?
I have.
Did you fly or drive?
Flew.
So when you flew, did you have any issue or problems flying back?
Yes.
Probably like some sort of a storm and or mechanical issue, right?
Yes. Most recently this past July, but it was Houston, not Dallas. But yes.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Texas has pop-up storms all the time, right? So a couple of years ago, I want to say this was 2017. I'm kind of guesstimating. I was coming back from the IndyCar race in Dallas. So we flew commercial the next day. It was a night race on Saturday night. So Sunday morning, get up and go to the airport. I would say 60% of the plane were people from IndyCar. Scoring people, timing and scoring, officials, teams, drivers, etc. So we all load up on the plane, take off. We're 35 minutes into the flight. Captain comes over and says, we have an issue. Mechanical issue. We're landing in Austin. We're making an emergency landing in Austin. You ever been to the Austin airport?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, so we land in Austin. So they say, well, it's going to be a minute. So everybody's, and I remember he goes, our satellite went out, our satellite map. And I'm thinking, well, I got an iPhone. Just if you've got the Wi-Fi, let's go, right?
Let's keep the bird in the air.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go. So we land in Austin, and we get off the plane, and they say, well, here's the deal. It's a small part. And I'm thinking to myself, can you go to AutoZone and get another one, right? I mean, let's get going here. No, they got to fly it from Dallas. Okay, great. But there's storms in Dallas. The planes are all grounded, so it's going to be a while. So what turns into now you have all these people, and we're all sitting there, and we're waiting for another plane to come and for them to repair the plane and whatever else. And we're there so long that they bring over a rack of chips. So I'm sitting there, and this woman next to me says, are those chips free? And I said, yeah, they are. Would you like a bag of chips? And she's sitting there with her husband. So I get them chips, and I hand them to her, and she says, she asks where we're coming back from, and I tell her, and she says, oh, have you ever been to the Indy 500? And I said, I have been to the Indy 500. I actually work at the Indy 500. And she goes, really? I said, yeah. And she said, well, my husband, and the guy sitting next to her, she said, my husband drove in the Indy 500. I said, no kidding. And her husband's sitting there, and he's got on a Hoosier Tires hat. And I said, what are your names? And she says, well, and I think it was Joyce. I'm Joyce, and this is Bill Vukovich, Jr. And I'm like, holy cow. Now, I'm from Indy, so I knew of the Vukoviches. Bill Vukovich Jr.'s father won the race in 53 and 54 in dominating fashion, probably should have won it in 52, and was fatally injured in 55 while leading the race. In the first quarter of the race, was fatally injured in the race, but one of the legendary names of 500 lore. And Bill Vukovich Jr. was 11 when his father was killed. Bill Vukovich Jr. ran the 500 several times. In 73, they thought he was leading the race late in the race when actually it was Gordon Johncock that was leading. There was a scoring error, and they came to, she was telling me that she told me this whole story. They came to Joyce at the end of the race and said, like, hey, get ready to go to victory lane. And she said, well, let's hold off here because I'm not certain. And in fact, they checked the scoring before the 200th lap to determine that Gordon Johncock was actually the leader and Vukovich was not actually leading the race. And she told me, she's like, he has never claimed otherwise. Bill Vukovich Jr. never claimed otherwise, that he had won the race or that he was cheated or anything like that. So during the course of, so we're sitting there, and I said, well, so you guys obviously are coming back from the race. And she said, well, no, we're coming from Fresno, which was the hometown of Bill Vukovich Sr. They had done a statue in honor of Bill Vukovich in Fresno. And Joyce, and again, I'm certain it was Joyce is her name, but Bill Vukovich Jr. and his wife were coming back from Fresno from that and had a layover in Dallas and just happened to be on our flight and as part of that layover. So Then we get a message from IndyCar saying, listen, we're sending down a plane for you guys. Since there are like 60 of us that all work for the league, instead of waiting another 12 hours or whatever it was going to take, they're like, we're sending down a plane to pick you guys up and bring you home. So I go to IndyCar and I say, listen, this is Bill Vukovich Jr. and his wife, and they should be on the plane. I mean, he's royalty at the Indianapolis 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. His father won the race twice. He was Rookie of the Year in the race in 68. He almost won the race in 73. He made multiple starts ending in 1980. Like, he should be on this plane with his wife. And I could tell, Jimmy, in talking to him, because I talked to him as well about racing and other such things, and I could tell that his mind wasn't 100% dialed in with what was taking place, truth be told. And I could say that now. Because they've been open about it. But I could tell at the moment I was thinking, like, it sounds like he maybe has like the early signs of dementia. This was, again, 6 or 7 years ago. But I said to them, I said, listen, I'm going to get you on this plane, and you guys just come with me, because we had to go to a different location to go to the plane. And so we just made our own little field trip out of it, the three of us. And I said, just come with me, and we'll take care of, I'll make sure that you're taken care of. And she was delightful, and he was just a peach. He was totally fun. His clarity of what was taking place, I think, kind of came and went, and you could kind of tell that, right? But at any rate, they could not have been more delightful. We landed at like 3 o'clock in the morning. We finally got home, and she also told me about Bill Vukovich III, their son, who was, a USAC driver, also ran in the Indy 500, and was fatally injured, I believe, in 88. And she was telling me that he loved sunflower seeds, their son, and that after he was killed in racing, she would see sunflower seeds, like, they'd go to a family birthday and they'd be walking into the restaurant and there'd be a sunflower seed on the ground, that kind of thing. But here was Bill Vukovich Jr., who his father was killed when he was 11 in racing. His son was killed in racing. And yet, he was still a racer at heart. He would still go to Charlie Brown's. He would still hang out with the guys. He would still tell stories. He was dear friends with Robin Miller, who was, a dear friend of mine. Yesterday, it was put on Facebook by their nephew that Bill Vukovich Jr. did pass away. So, hopefully, and I realized it was the son, but maybe he's up there eating lots of sunflower seeds and talking with Robin and talking about the 73 race and whatever it might be. But he was, life is an interesting thing, and that you never know when your path's going to cross with someone else. You never know when somebody that you've known of your whole life, all of a sudden, serendipitously, you have an encounter with them for the day. And I had an encounter with them for that day and that night, and we had a really, really annoying situation. And thanks to them, we made the best of it, and we had a fun time. And so for a lot of people, Bill Vukovich Jr. will be remembered for not only his father's legacy and also his legacy as a race car driver, but for me, it will be over the fact that simply a free bag of Sun Chips turned into a pretty fun night. And it was pretty cool. Yeah. But certainly condolences to the racing community, to the Vukovich family. Obviously disingenuous to think that they're listening right now. But nonetheless, a big name within the racing world passing away yesterday. Bill Vukovich would have been 79 years old. Bill Vukovich II, 79 years old. He turned 79 in March. So, Jimmy, you're a Notre Dame fan. Notre Dame playing Clemson this year in Clemson.
Yep.
Notre Dame repeats what they did last year and makes a mockery of it, or Notre Dame returns to Notre Dame form against Clemson?
Ask me after September 23rd. Because I will be at Notre Dame Stadium when they take on Ohio State, and all I'm hearing are press tours about how, they're going to look better this year. Sam Hartman looks confident as a transfer quarterback.
Have you seen him play?
I've not seen him play other than highlights, no.
Very good. He's a really good quarterback. He's transferred from Wake. I saw him obviously play against Clemson. I don't know. I mean, I watched every game, home or away. So I saw him in person probably twice. Really good. I mean, he's a really good quarterback. And I don't like Notre Dame at all.
A lot of people don't. It's all right.
You obviously either love or hate Notre Dame.
Sure.
Right?
I grew up Catholic. That's half it. My great-grandpa went there. Like, there's
hate's a strong word.
Sure.
But
it's any of the other teams in sport you can name.
There's no in-between. The two schools where there's no in-between are Ohio State and Notre Dame.
Yeah.
It's probably the ultimate compliment. But you don't meet anybody that's like, yeah, kind of like, yeah, okay. Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm one of those that's like, yeah, no. However, the first time that I went to a Notre Dame game, I think I was covering, it was the Reggie Bush push game. I was covering it. I've always told the story that after the game, I was up in the press box and I was taking the elevator down to go do interviews afterwards, and this 90-pound liver spot with a sweatshirt on that said God Country Notre Dame came and pushed me very hard in the sternum and said, UCLA is going to kick your ass next week. And I'm like, yeah, I don't play for USC, man. I'm just a media member from Channel 6. But going up there, it is impossible to not have an increased respect for Notre Dame, right? I mean, just the tradition of it, all of it. I do think that it is a program that has, and I get it, it's rested on its laurels a lot lately, but it can. In terms of the conference realignment, there are a lot of people that are like, Notre Dame needs to join the Big Ten. Notre Dame's not going to do so. NBC essentially sat down with Notre Dame and said, okay, and to the Big Ten, and said, listen, the Big Ten has the contract with Fox and FS1 and everything else. They're going to go for 20. They're going to push for Cal and Stanford to be the last two. And Notre Dame is kind of the holdout. But the Big Ten went to Notre Dame and basically made their last pitch, and NBC went to Notre Dame and said, if we can get primetime Saturday night games, and the majority of them, and USC will still schedule you, which they will, and like Purdue or Michigan State will still schedule you, which they will, then you can remain independent, and NBC will give the money to offset the lack of affiliation, and that's what's going to happen. You watch. That's what's going to happen. And then if for some reason, which I don't anticipate, if for some reason the big Notre Dame decides they do in 3 years want to go to the Big Ten, if the party looks so fun they got to be a part of it, then at that point the Big Ten will welcome them at any time.
Yeah.
Right? And if that's the case, then Rutgers or Nebraska are going to be called into a boardroom, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to take a vote. And it's going to be one of those two, because Rutgers, I don't think, brought them ROI that they thought, and Nebraska doesn't have the television market. And frankly, Nebraska football has dipped seriously since. But all of that to be said, I do think that Freeman looks the part and just seems very buttoned up and seems like I think Brian Kelly can flat out coach, but he's just such a weirdo.
Yeah.
Freeman, to me, seems like a guy that might have the same coaching acumen, but is a much cooler and more refreshing version of it.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, no, I would. And the reason that I'm hesitant with expectations is because with Notre Dame in general, gone are the days, you mentioned leaving fanhood at the door as you grow up. Gone are the days of me thinking, yeah, they're going to contend for a national title. That's a legitimate aspiration for them, and it's not just a recruiting pitch or not just resting on their laurels. I'm a doubting Thomas at this point. I'm still going to root him and support for him, but I need to see it to believe it.
Right.
And like that half of football they had against Ohio State last year on the road, like it was impressive. It surprised me, but like by and large, it's hard to call that anything more than an anomaly of what the actual season was for them. But is there foundation there, or is it just?
Well, so let me ask you this: with the Ohio State game, it can go one of two ways. If they were to go out and get run out of the building against Ohio State, and there's not even a shame in that, because I think Ohio State's going to be at a different level than the vast majority of teams. But if they were to get run out of the building, maybe that's one thing. But is a moral victory enough for you?
It's enough for me to think that the big games on the schedule, USC, Clemson, that would follow could be different, yes.
See, I think Clemson, like the Clemson thing to me, and I love them, but I think it's over. Like in terms of the stratosphere that Clemson was in, I don't think they ever return to that. I mean, there was a time where, coming off of the Watson era and even the Taj Boyd era for Clemson, Dabo Swinney was getting he was getting a top 3 recruiting class year in and year out, and you saw obviously the benefit of that.
Yes.
Now, through NIL and transfer portal and some of the things where Dabo Swinney has been very staunch in sticking by his almost antiquated ways, I do think that they have dipped now where their recruiting is not near what it was. And one of the beneficiaries of that is Notre Dame, because Notre Dame has been able to get players that seemingly in years past were locks for Michigan or Clemson or whatever it might be, and now Notre Dame's back in that mix. They've always gotten good players,
sure,
but they're back in that mix. But you go to how many games a year?
Usually, I try to go to one a year.
Okay, and do you your family have tickets, or do you just like stub?
This time was just secondary.
Yeah. I here's the thing. Ohio State and Notre Dame, to me, it's kind of like Ivan Drago and Clubber Lang. Like I don't like either one of them, right? So I'm like, okay. I mean, last year it was on my 50th birthday. My 50th birthday was the day of Notre Dame Ohio State, and we had a get together on the north side, and Kevin was there, Kevin Bowen. He's a huge Notre Dame fan, and he's watching the game intently, right? And I get it. I mean, he doesn't know a lot of my high school buddies, whatever else. But a lot of my friends, as the game is going on, more and more people are drifting over to join Kevin to watch the game because it's like they're hanging around.
Yeah.
And it was their defense that was doing it for them, right? Are they going to be able to score points? I guess they have a transfer quarterback. That's the story, right?
That's what you're being told. All these interview hits on SVP and everywhere else that they're going to be able to, and that's their first real test. You look at the rest of their schedule, that's their first real test of what is this year going to be about. Is it going to be a 9-4 season where you're sitting there scratching your head wondering what to take away from it, or is it they have room for one stumble, which is one loss of one of those 3 games, and then they're part of the college football playoff?
I would like a scoreless tie in that Ohio State Notre Dame game.
You ever seen? Are you a movie guy?
Oh, of course.
You've seen Dark Knight Rises?
That's a Batman one, right?
It is a Batman one.
I'm not real good with sci-fi. Is that sci-fi, would you say?
It's less sci-fi than Star Wars. Star Wars is sci-fi. Yeah. That's a superhero movie, right? Anyway, there's a scene where...
Yeah, I'm not good with superheroes.
The main antagonist, Bane, in that movie, it's a scene at Heinz Field, and there's like a big explosion, and like the field tumbles, and I think it was Antoine Randall or Heinz Ward or who it is taking a touchdown house call to open the kickoff, but the field is gone behind him. Teams are gone, presumably just wiped off the face of the earth.
Perfect.
That's that type of game for people. Is Notre Dame Ohio State?
Here's the thing, though. In that scenario, I love the entire hypothetical, except for that it means that for that scenario to be true, either Ohio State or Notre Dame has to be scoring a touchdown, and I don't like that either. So that doesn't work for me either, right? But speaking of movies, I do have a music question for you. I need you guys to educate me on some music when we come back. Just give me your opinion. I want your guys' opinion on a topic that's been keeping me awake at night since November. Okay? And then Bob Kravitz is going to join us in 35 minutes. He had a Q&A with Peyton Manning talking about Anthony Richardson. We'll get into that with Bob in 34 minutes.
How do you
According to Sean Copeland, our esteemed coworker and the program director for B105, so they do these things where they like rate songs. You know, they give like the listening audience 100 songs and you thumb up, thumb down, whatever.
Like a Nielsen for music?
Exactly. This is apparently the highest scoring song in the catalog.
Really?
Yeah, Living on a Prayer. I've never been a huge fan, but John Bon Jovi seems like a decent dude, but never been a huge fan.
I like the song. I mean, I don't know that I'd rate it as my all-time favorite song, but I like it. I could get that why it'd be very popular amongst the masses.
I always thought You Give Love a Bad Name was like their bigger hit, but it clearly is not. I mean, Living on a Prayer, I think, was rated as the number one song of the 80s by the errant Billboard magazine.
The guitar drop in You Could Love a Bad Name is right up there. I love that.
Oh, I mean, it's great, right?
Yeah. It's get hype music.
So here's my question for you guys. And follow me on this. This is one of my radio standbys, but I am curious because Eddie had mentioned this earlier, so I'm bringing it up. Do you define classic rock? Now follow me here. Those of you that are listening in your car, I'm going to drop you a question, and you're going to say to yourself, this is a sports station. What are we doing here? But then tonight at dinner, you are going to say, if you actually sit down at a dinner table with people like they used to do in the 50s, if you sit down at dinner tonight, you are going to say to yourself, you know, I heard this guy say something on the radio, and I thought I was tuning in to hear about Anthony Richardson, or I thought I was tuning in to hear about Jonathan Taylor, or I thought I was tuning in to hear Bob Kravitz, who's going to join us in 30 minutes. But instead, this guy asked this question, and I thought it was the dumbest thing ever, but now I've asked 7 people since then about it, and we continue to discuss it. So I'm going to present to you, Eddie Garrison, and to you, Jimmy Cook, the following question. When you hear the term classic rock, as a matter of fact, let me bring in Airport Jimmy, because Airport Jimmy is the perfect person to answer this question, okay? Airport Jimmy, what's up?
Jake, my man, I am so glad you put me on. I am the perfect guy to talk to about this. But first, I want to congratulate you on the show. Dude, I can finally start listening again in the afternoons. Jimmy, I love you. You're my brother. But anybody else, I'm sorry. I had to flip it. I'm just letting you know.
Now, come on, Jimmy.
That feels like you'll...
I am psyched, brother, that you're back on where you need to be. You got your own show. You got everything rocking, brother.
Well, Jimmy, I appreciate it, but it's not my own show. I will say there's a cast of a lot of people helping me out. But let me ask you. So, Jimmy, here's my question for you. And I've always called you caffeinated, Jimmy, for the obvious reasons. I know you're Airport Jimmy as well. But you, Jimmy, I'm assuming, or I'm guessing, because I think I actually saw you in Louisville at a Slipknot concert, right? It was Guns N' Roses, but Slipknot opened, right?
No, but we have had many encounters before. I may have had a rock T-shirt on, but I've seen them both. So, yeah, it wasn't me, but anyway.
I could have sworn, Jimmy, were you not at Guns N' Roses in Louisville?
I was at Guns N' Roses in Louisville, but we didn't run into each other. But, yes, I was at that show, yep.
Okay, that's what it was. We didn't run into each other, but we were both there, and Slipknot open, I think is what it was. But here's my question. So here's my question for you, and then I'm going to give it to Eddie and to Jimmy.
Got it, brother.
So do you think, caffeinated Jimmy, when you think of classic rock, okay, do you think classic rock is defined by a specific window of years? In other words, like 1968 to 1980 is classic rock and forever will be? Or does classic rock simply mean music that is 40 years ago, regardless of what era you are currently calling it? So in other words, can classic rock now be music from 1983 to 1990 because it's 40 to 37 years old, or is it specifically and forever locked in as music from 1968 to 1980?
I think it just grows from like the 60s all the way to like the 80s, you said, because I'm a huge Van Halen fan, the real Van Halen, but I hate to say it, but that's classic rock now with old Dave. Okay. But whenever I think of classic rock, I immediately go to Led Zeppelin, because no one can touch Led Zeppelin anyway.
10 years from now, Jimmy, does Pearl Jam become classic rock in 10 years?
I would say yes, unless they put out new stuff.
Okay. I appreciate the call. So Jimmy Cook, not caffeinated Jimmy Cook. To you, classic rock means the years or simply the age regardless of what year you're in? Do you understand my
Yes.
question?
I would have thought it was the years, but not necessarily when the record was released, when the band was formed. Like, if you're a band that was formed during that time, like 60s, 70s, 80s, I'm going to umbrella you underneath that, regardless of when you...
Well, okay.
I know sounds change and styles change, but, like, you're a classic rock band, maybe now putting out new stuff.
So does Duran Duran, are they classic rock? It's 40 years old. Is Hungry Like the Wolf classic rock? Because that's 40 years ago. It's the same time frame as Van Halen. If you're going simply based on age, then do you categorize it all together?
Yes.
So you think Duran Duran? So you would go if you're Jimmy Cook the DJ, right? You're Jimmy Cook the DJ right now. Rip it in and rip off the knob. 93.5 The Buzzard. Classic rock. Up next, Hungry Like the Wolf, and then The Doors. Light My Fire. So you would go from one to the other. I'm not saying you're wrong.
I mean, I would have thought that classic rock would have been the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stone, Queen.
I would agree, because that's the era. So, like, to me, so here's what's fascinating to me. And this is where my brain works weird in the late hours because I'm nocturnal, and that's why I'm on this day part. So, for example, what is fascinating to me is the Doors. Now, do young people still, when I say young people, I mean like people in their 20s, 30s, do you still know of the Doors?
I'm the wrong person to ask for this. I'm a very mainstream music guy.
Okay,
I'm not trying
again,
to burn the radio. Yes,
can,
I've heard of the Doors.
Okay.
I could not name you a Doors song. Eddie's a better person for this exercise.
So, okay, do you know Light My Fire?
Maybe if I heard it, but not by name.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Do you know Love Me Two Times by the Doors?
No.
Eddie, do you?
I feel like I should know a song. I think I know Light My Fire. That's about it.
Okay, what about Break On Through? Break On Through
to the other side. Yes, I know that.
Okay,
Yes,
that's the Doors, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
I knew there was a song.
Okay,
yeah.
so here's what's fascinating to me. The Doors, that song, the ones that I just mentioned to you are 50 to 52, 53 years old. So I totally understand why you guys would be like, it's not as mainstream. I get that, right? But you still are aware of it and you still hear it like within pop culture, like in a movie reference or a commercial or something.
That specific song is in a Tony Hawk skateboarding video game.
Correct.
I remember it as a kid.
Or like Guitar Hero,
Sure.
some of those are in there, right?
Yep.
Same with Zeppelin.
Yep.
But in 1973, when those songs came out, no one was walking around playing music from 1920. No one. So what happened? When did we make a change that there was no coming back from? So you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
Like in 1920, people were listening to like Count Basie and Glenn Miller. I don't know if Count Basie is actually like the 40s, but like big band era, right? So, but nobody was rocking out at a fraternity party in 1970 in Bloomington listening to big band music. They weren't like, come by the Sigma Chi house, we're playing Glenn Miller and Last Train to Pottersville. Like nobody was doing that, right?
Aboard the A train, we're not playing that. Okay,
right?
Yeah.
But yet it would not be.
It's a generational complex. At what point does the music become labeled as classic whatever? Classic rock. You don't hear. I know classic rock is a defined genre. You don't hear classic hip hop, but at some point, it's throwback or is it current hip hop music?
Fair. The same is true like in sports of stadiums.
Yes.
I've always said this, like Wrigley Field is awesome.
Yeah.
Fenway Park is awesome. But at some point they had to have gone through a period where people were like, these stadiums are a dump. When are they going to tear them down? Like Riverfront Stadium was a total dump, a cookie cutter dump. Everybody wanted to get rid of it. The RCA Dome, got to get rid of the RCA Dome. It's outdated.
Yep.
Lucas Oil Stadium is now 70% the age the RCA Dome was when we imploded it. So at what point do you fight through the awkward acne braces year of stadiums before it becomes classic, right? And like the same thing in music. What happened when Jim Morrison started playing, Light My Fire? People like that were 60 years old are like, this is totally different than what I heard in fourth grade. But now when you hear something, it's not totally different than what you heard in 1970.
Yeah.
That's my point. Like, this is the kind of stuff that keeps me awake at night. You guys think I'm out of my mind, don't you? I can tell. Both of you right now are saying to yourself, what the hell did I sign up for? Is that what you're saying to yourself, Eddie?
Well, I knew you go on these kind of diatribes, so I was just wondering how long it would take you to get to one of them. And
An hour and 39 minutes. How's that?
I thought you had like vampiric trends with your lifestyle of in the dark in the mornings, and I was surprised that you were able to absorb sunlight on your way in here. So,
Jake, after 40 years, it's classic rock any longer, and all the fans would be dead anyway. Well, I'm just telling you, like, but I go back to Duran Duran. I cannot put in the same category as Led Zeppelin. I just can't.
Maybe this is the final question to bring it full circle or final statement on it, because you brought up Nickelback earlier. Nickelback is a rock group, correct? Yes? Is that, I'm not saying classic rock, but they're a rock group. Is that a fair statement, Eddie Garrison?
Fair statement, yeah.
In 40 years, I'm never going to think of Nickelback as classic rock. Is the modern rock listener going to label them as a classic rock band because it's aged?
Here's what I would say. I'm spitballing here, right? But I feel like classic rock is a generic term to mean the first generation of rock.
Okay.
And I get that, like, Buddy Holly and you know, Bill Haley and the Comets was the first rock stuff. I get that, right? But in terms of rock and like rock music, I feel like classic rock means the first installment of it. Then you had other eras that came through, the new wave era, and then like obviously the hip hop era, the disco era. So I think that 40 years from now, Nickelback and other bands like that will probably have some sort of a different discerning, like millennial rock. And I don't mean millennial meaning the age group of the listeners, but around the time of the new millennium, right? Sure. Like new century rock. It'll have some new term for it to differentiate it from the original form of rock that was 68 to 80.
So that's a closed era. Then I agree with you on that.
In my opinion, it's a closed era. That's the best way of saying it, yes. Okay. See, it took 10 minutes for us to get around to the fact that closed era is what we're looking for. Zach wants to weigh in. Zach, what's up? Aren't you thrilled you're joining this program?
Hey, Jake. Enjoying the discussion. Congrats on the new show.
Thank you.
I'm older than you, so I was born in 54. To me, the key word and definition in classic rock is it had to be a classic. In other words, a time period, no doubt, had lots of music that was really popular to an individual or a few individuals. But when I hear classic rock, it's those songs that were iconic, like Hotel California will always be a classic.
Okay, so what about this, though? So some B-side cut of The Animals that did not get main radio play, is it a classic?
Well, some people are going to call it's an alive subject, and what was classic to you may have not been classic to me and my kids, for instance.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's subjective, right?
Yes.
By the way, Zach, what did you do for a living, Zach? You sound like an incredibly intelligent individual.
I work out with you at the gym. Well, we don't work out together, but I talk to you at the gym. I'm a big Indy fan, and thanks for the story on Bill Vukovich.
Zach, I don't know if you've noticed this or not at the gym. I don't work out at all. I just walk around and talk to people.
Talk a lot.
Yeah.
Me and you.
You notice that? I'm up on the like I'll get on the treadmill and pose a little bit, and then people come up to me, and I'm like, well, actually, let's stop and talk, right?
I've never seen any sweat, to be honest.
Well, I'm good at that cafe, Zach, which is usually where you find me, right? I appreciate the call.
Congrats, Joe.
Thanks, appreciate it. You go to a gym, Jimmy?
No.
You an elliptical guy, treadmill guy?
I don't do
Eddie,
enough.
what are you?
Neither.
Okay. He is right. I am at the gym a lot, but it doesn't mean I'm working out per se. Is it Ethan?
Yes, sir.
Ethan, you got a brother named Alan?
I do not.
Okay.
I get that a lot. That's not the first time I've heard that.
I'll bet. It's like being Jake from State Farm, man. You and I are both screwed, right?
Correct.
All right, what's up?
The classic rock, my parents, they grew up in the 60s. I was born in 91, so they introduced me to classic rock, and me listening to 104.5 growing up, it's Led Zeppelin, Doors, Rolling Stones, Beatles, Eagles. That's classic rock. And I think it ended at the point that you're talking about with Duran Duran and progressive rock.
Yeah, so probably disco, and progressive is a good way of saying it. Probably disco was the Boulder in the Stream, right?
I would say so, but you still have Aerosmith have a ton of hits in the 80s, 90s. So it's up in the air, like you said. It's subjective, but hey, I'm younger and I still rock with the Doors, baby.
The Doors are great, man. I'm telling you. Ethan, you said you were born in 91, Ethan?
He did 91? Say that. He said 91.
It's a hell of a year.
He hung up on you.
Hail our Panthers, 1991, baby. Bob Kravitz in 15.
There is still
Jake, we were discussing earlier about Jim Irsay's comments during the broadcast of Colts Bears and his gushing comments about how much he loves Jonathan Taylor and he wants Jonathan Taylor to be a Colt and he's happy he's back and all the flowers he threw his way. And you and I were kind of discussing this a little bit off air earlier in the show, but if I'm Jonathan Taylor sitting back and hearing those comments, where were they a couple weeks ago? Where this love and support in the public eye a couple weeks ago, instead of, even though I don't think he did it to intentionally attack JT, the tweet that he sent out about the running back market, the weird, which is always, it's not a Colts season unless you have one weird Jim Irsay comment at minimum. The if I die and Jonathan Taylor's out of the league, no one will remember us. Like, just the weird snake-like path that we took to get to that point. It's great, but if I'm Jonathan Taylor, if you love me that much, my pushback now is they're empty words. I need the money. Show me the money to be able to have that reciprocated feeling of love, and I'm an all-time Colt, and I want to be a part of the franchise forever.
I agree with that. I think that Kevin made a really interesting point, Kevin Bowen, a couple of weeks ago when this first happened. And I think it's pretty insightful. When Jim Irsay came out against Daniel Snyder, like Jim Irsay said what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. So he comes out and he essentially calls out Daniel Snyder and says, we're going to make some changes in terms of, I mean, he didn't say that, but he insinuated that the owners, I think his direct wording, I think his direct point, and I'm paraphrasing, was, we feel like as owners we now have enough evidence or ammunition to oust Daniel Snyder as owner of the Redskins. And when he said it, there was a lot of ripple effect of like, wow, number one, but then number two, wow, he just called him out. And a lot of owners, I think, kind of patted on the back Jim Irsay for that. And so the perception was there that Irsay suddenly was like the mouthpiece for owners.
Yes.
And I think Irsay thought that. I think Irsay thought to himself, I'm the guy that they're looking at. And, Irsay's all about, if you look, Jimmy.
That's how I took that tweet, by the way, was him viewing himself as a Jerry Jones type level mouthpiece for the league.
Right. So here's what's interesting. If you look at Daniel Snyder, made his money through, I don't know if it was FedEx, but he and his sister started a business together, grew it into a mountain from a molehill, made a ton of money, and bought an NFL team. Okay? Jerry Jones. I honestly can't remember what business he had, but he was a successful business person that made a ton of money and then eventually bought the Dallas Cowboys. There are very few teams, I mean, the Rooneys would be one, but most teams that right now, most ownership groups in the National Football League are people that made their money elsewhere. Jim Irsay, not a knock on him at all, but Jim Irsay has only been involved in one aspect of a business, and that is a team. Jim Irsay's father had basically warehousing companies in Chicago, wanted to own an NFL team for his daughter. So Bob Irsay bought an NFL team with hopes that he would hand it to his daughter and have his daughter be the first minority owner in the National Football League. And then there was a tragic car accident involving his daughter right after he bought the team. He traded franchises with Rosenblum, and now he owned the Baltimore Colts. And so what was thought to be a purchase and a business venture for his daughter now shifts to where Jim Irsay grows up knowing nothing but football and being in the locker room and folding towels and seeing the inner workings of a team and team captains and having the back of your guy and defending your teammates. And that's all he's ever known. And so now that he is the owner of it, I think that he feels that the NFL ownership brethren is a team. And he sees it as, we are a team of owners that are in the locker room, and one of us has to be the captain that stands up and has the back of the rest of the team. And so he did that with Daniel Snyder, and then I think that he got a little bit probably inflated of his own clout amongst the ownership groups. Some of the owners, I think, originally resented Irsay because, for the reasons I mentioned, in terms of how he got the franchise.
Sure.
But I think that's waned. I think he's respected. But I definitely think that with the running back situation, he took it upon himself, Jimmy, to what you just said. This is a league that has a collective bargaining agreement about a number of different things, including salaries, and the running backs are wanting to buck that now, and they're wanting to reset the market, and all of the owners are privately saying that we don't want to overpay running backs, so I'm going to be the owner that stands in the forefront and makes that proclamation on behalf of all the guys on my team. And then once he did it, I think there were guys on his team that were like, actually, we didn't say that, because they didn't want that bleeding into their franchise. And then he was kind of stuck a little bit. And now he has to go back and say, but I wasn't talking about you, Jonathan Taylor. I was just talking in generalities, which is dangerous, right?
Yeah.
It's a dangerous thing to do. Bob Kravitz, by the way, speaking of talking, talked to Peyton Manning yesterday, and we will talk to Bob coming up here. Do you give me a peace sign, Eddie?
Oh, you got 2 minutes here. You still got some time.
Oh, we got 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
I thought you said 56.
58.
What am I supposed to do for an hour, or a minute and 40 seconds?
Optics matter for me. And that's why, like, I'm not in Jim Irsay's head. And the one thing that's been, regardless of which media member you talk to, has been preached upon me more than anything is it's a fool's errand trying to read him. Like, it's particularly reading tea leaves. So I'm willing to believe, like, yeah, he didn't intentionally mean to go after his own running back. It was a broad strokes, being a representative of the league and being looked upon the same way Jones is for the league and the owners. But optics matter, and it was a terrible look at the time, and I'm not going to say it's the only thing, because JT's agent pushing back and starting Twitter fights is not great either. But
Jimmy,
it was
I think the agent was brought in for that. And by the way, Bob Irsay, HVAC money. I said warehousing. It was like large corporate HVAC money. Jerry Jones was oil, no surprise, in Texas. I think I think Jonathan Taylor,
as do I,
went out and got an agent
Yep.
to be a foil.
Yep.
Like, I think Jonathan Taylor said, you know what? I don't want an agent that's going to play nice guy. I want an agent that's going to play hardball. And he, Taylor went out and very rigorously sifted through and vetted a ton of different agents before he selected the one that he selected. And yes, it's the agent that got the deal for Shaquille Leonard with injury, frankly. So that is favorable, but at the same time, it's one that I think, given his background, was not afraid to basically get into the trenches and start throwing dirt a little bit. And that's what they've done. Was that a minute and 40 seconds, Eddie? Okay, good. Then Bob Kravitz is next. Two o'clock hour on a Monday. How are you? Jake Query along with Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison in here as well. 93.5 107.5 The Fan. Plenty of conversation today, not only about classic rock, but obviously the Colts are the main topic of discussion. Joining us now is Bob Kravitz, who you can read, and I will allow Bob to expand upon where you can read his latest work, which is a really good one, a Q&A with Peyton Manning. Substack is the website, which is fabulous because you buy a subscription, and not only can you read Bob's musings of an old sports writer, as he calls it, but that of several different workers in the library of writers they have. So, Bob, let's begin with this. Tell people exactly where they can find the column and the latest that you have with Peyton.
Sure. It's bobkravitz.substack.com, and you can sign up there. And, I'm writing about 3-4 times a week, and a lot of Colts lately, a lot of talk of Jonathan Taylor, and I had my interview with Peyton, who was terrific as usual.
Okay, so let's begin with that in terms of the Peyton Manning discussion. You have had a relationship with him for quite some time. He is now living in the city where you once lived in Denver. So when you first reached out to him, did you find that Peyton Manning was eager to talk about the quarterback situation for the Colts, hesitant to talk about? Give me kind of the temperate, if you will, of the interview.
Oh, yeah. No, he was eager. As I always do, I just emailed him, and he said, hey, how's Friday at 8:40 Mountain Time sound? I said, that's cool. We talked for about 25 minutes. He was driving. I think he was driving his kid somewhere. So we went about 25 minutes, and he was great. He's when he doesn't want to talk about something, he'll just not respond. But nine times out of 10 he does, and he's always great.
So in terms of, Bob, Manning's impression of the approach with Anthony Richardson, I mean, I know what the article says, but I'll let you tend to tip the hand as much as you want here, but it's hard to believe 25 years ago he was in that situation. Did Manning learn things from when he was a player that can translate to the way they handle Anthony Richardson?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like he said, there were probably games where they should have pulled me, and they didn't. They made the commitment that they were going to stay with them come hell or high water. And, he talked about some games where they got absolutely clobbered and scored a garbage touchdown at the end of, I think, the New England game. And he said that was stuff they could build on. It was stuff, reps that he could learn from. That's why I found the whole thing Saturday night with Anthony Richardson not playing against the Bears, I found it so unusual. Talking with Peyton, he made it sound like, and I think it's the truth, every rep counts. And, you can rep stuff in preseason, in practice, all you want, but there's nothing like game action and not wearing a red jersey. So I thought that was interesting, especially in light of what Peyton had to say about how he learned a little something from virtually every rep he got during the preseason and the regular season.
Bob, in the piece, you ask him directly in that Q&A if there's any advice that he would want to give Anthony Richardson, and he opens the answer basically saying that he doesn't like doing that in interview form for a number of different reasons, but he later elaborates on if he was, what he would pass along to him, and talks a lot as well about the humility that he's seen already from the young Florida quarterback. What was your biggest takeaway from that answer of if he was to pass along the advice in interview form, where the biggest mark would be to help Anthony Richardson's development?
I think, all the obvious ones, keep grinding and working and winning over your locker room and commanding the huddle. One thing he did say was, you're going to go through some hard times your rookie year and possibly second and third year, and don't deal with it alone. If you have adversity, have people you can lean on. And that's one of the great things with Anthony. He moved his whole family and some friends up from Florida here to Indianapolis. And I think he's got a support system that's really going to be helpful to him when he does face that adversity, because he will. I guarantee you he will. He's a guy who's played 13 games in college. Peyton faced all this adversity. He played 40, 45, something like that in college. So Peyton was far more prepared than Anthony Richardson, and he still went through all this stuff. And
I think it was good that Peyton had his dad and he had Eli, and he understood what was going to come. And I think Anthony Richardson's got a good support system.
Bob, when I look at Peyton Manning, Bob Kravitz is our guest, and we're talking about his interview with Peyton Manning. When I look at Peyton Manning and the apples and oranges would be this. The apples would be the fact that both he and Anthony Richardson were drafted very high, obviously Manning number one, but that the keys were handed over to them and the car was going to run based on those guys being the engine. Mm-hmm. The oranges being, in Manning's case, I think the expectation was that it was not going to be long. And so therefore there was kind of an accelerated timeline in terms of the approach. And in Richardson's case, I feel like, sure, maybe it would have benefited him to play against Chicago, but Indianapolis is not looking for him to be accelerated on when he is going to win them games. Like, this is a long process. Would you agree that the timelines feel different?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Peyton, it came down to Peyton and Ryan Leaf, and I think both guys were viewed as players who would play right away and have success. Obviously, that didn't happen for either one. And Ryan Leaf's story, we all know what happened there. But no, but with Peyton, you knew, it might be, like we've seen with Lawrence down in Jacksonville. It took a year or two. You got him away from Urban Meyer, got him a professional coach in Peterson. But I do think with Anthony, people understand it's going to take some time. And I'm not talking about a year. I just don't see them being a 13-3 team next year the way they were with Peyton in their second year. I do think the timeline is significantly different, and people in Indy have got to just sort of grin and bear it and understand that this is the guy. Look, they would win more games with Gardner Minshew this year, I believe, than Anthony Richardson. But it's going to be great fun, I think, and very revealing to watch not only how Richardson performs, but the way he handles the adversity that's definitely going to come.
But, Bob, shouldn't we be encouraged by this? Sam Ehlinger had, I think, 60 yards on the ground. And Shane Steichen is a guy that, if you look at Jalen Hurts, he's able to design running plays. Other than the fact that Anthony Richardson on a couple of occasions has wanted to lower the shoulder and go Earl Campbell at Texas, which probably is not a good recipe for a quarterback. But shouldn't we be encouraged at the way that Shane Steichen might be able to come up with plays for Richardson that don't involve throwing the ball right away?
Absolutely. And I had a conversation with Rick Venturi the other day, and he was saying that it was tougher for Peyton coming in because he had to learn a complex passing game from the word go. Whereas, Anthony Richardson already knows a good 50% of this stuff because he's been running it at Florida for the last, year or so. And he's, and all that, most of that stuff is read option, RPOs, all that sort of stuff. So I think that Anthony is going to be very prepared, maybe even more prepared in some ways to run this offense because a lot of it is going to be reliant on his legs and whoever is playing behind him in the backfield. Don't know if that's going to be Jonathan Taylor or not, but that's another story.
Also, Bob, you and I talked about this last week, but I wanted to publicly discuss it because I think it's interesting. The one thing, and I know we could sit here and talk till the cows come home about, should they have cut Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, all that, right? I mean, that's all been exhausted. But the one byproduct of that I find interesting is it wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to be that if you wanted to talk to Peyton Manning about Anthony Richardson, you caught up with him at the Starbucks in Nora because he was getting ready to pick his kid up from Park Tudor, where his kid's going to be the freshman quarterback. And he's at the sidelines high-fiving Tyrese Halliburton after a big shot for the Pacers in February. Yeah. And he's swinging by his children's hospital twice a week. That's how it was supposed to be. And obviously we know that it didn't turn out to be that way. Do you believe that Denver long-term, that's where he is going to be?
Yes, I do. First of all, Denver is a lovely place, as is Indianapolis. It's got better skiing than Indianapolis, I can say that. But his wife really loves it. And the bottom line is, if you have kids, you want them to stay in the same school system if you possibly can. Picking up and uprooting children is not an easy thing for the kids. And I think it's really important to Peyton and to Ashley to have their kids stay in the same general area. I think they're in Cherry Creek area of Denver, which is just beautiful. It's very, very much like Carmel, I would say. And so I think he's a Denver guy. You saw him at the Nuggets championship, NBA championship games, rooting for the Nuggets. So I think it's not that he's left Indianapolis behind by any stretch of the imagination. He's still very involved in a lot of stuff here in Indy. And the fact that he's still willing to talk to me, a guy who thought that he should be let go, and a guy who's not working for, a big outlet right now, tells you that he still has connections to this city. And I don't think that's ever going to change. I don't think he's upset or terribly bitter about how things ended. I'm sure there's a little bit of bitterness, but I think Denver is going to be their home for a very long time.
Bob Kravitz with us on Query and Company. You can subscribe to his work on Substack, Musings of an Old Sports Writer, with that Q&A that just came out from him and Peyton Manning. Bob, how much does Peyton still grimace whenever he gets asked about the rookie interception record? And I've read the answer, so I know I responded to you, but he also alluded to the fact that rookie quarterbacks sometimes don't often play long enough in season to be able to get that record. He said he doesn't want Anthony to touch it. That's not worth it to him for that to happen, but
right.
Shane Steichen makes it seem like he might play every game he possibly can this season.
I think the kid will. I asked Steichen when he announced Richardson, I said, if he struggles, will you go to Minshew? And he said, Anthony's our starter. So the way he answered it told me that they are going to stick with Anthony through thick and thin. It's ride or die with number 5. And I think that's a smart way to do it. Now, if he's getting his brains beat in, which I don't suspect will happen, even though they gave up 60 sacks last year, I think this is going to be a much better offensive line with a year under him. And, with some – I still think their offensive line depth leaves a lot to be desired. But unless the kid just gets his brains beat in or just looks like he's losing his confidence, I have a feeling that he's going to be the starter or that he's going to take every snap this year. And I think, especially when you talk to Peyton about how even these innocuous moments when they're getting killed at the end of a game against New England, and they put together a late drive against a team that didn't even want to be there anymore, and how they took stuff out of that. I think all those experiences are valuable, and that's why I think Anthony is going to get the same treatment that Peyton got.
Bob, I'm going to ask a question I thought of the other day. I think we discussed it a little bit. But you tell me if this is me being way too combination of naive and optimistic. Anthony Richardson started 13 games at Florida. Peyton Manning started a gabillion at Tennessee. Trevor Lawrence started, 30 of them at Clemson. Josh Allen started a gabillion of them at Wyoming, whatever. Is there any chance that for Anthony Richardson, the lack of starts in college actually will benefit him because it will mean that he did not become accustomed to or comfortable with the luxuries that you have at the collegiate level in terms of bigger gaps and bigger spaces that you're throwing to, and thus it will be easier to create in him newer habits that are NFL friendly?
That's an interesting question. That's a Jake question right there.
That's right.
I don't know. I think experience is so important, and I think yeah. Look, if you're asking me would I have preferred that Anthony Richardson played 30 games rather than 13 in college, I'll say 30 every time. So, yeah, I don't think it's one of those things where, he has to unlearn a lot of stuff. That's true, but I don't know. I tend to think that the more experience you get, the better you're going to be. And Peyton was certainly more prepared for what he faced than Anthony is going to be for what he's going to face.
More popular quarterback currently in Denver, Peyton Manning or John Elway?
More popular?
Yep.
I got to say John Elway, because John Elway was the first.
True, but here's what I've always thought, Bob, and you know Peyton Manning. I mean, and listen, you know Elway too. I mean, you covered both of them, right? I have always felt like when people here were like, and I'll give you another Jake query here for you, Bob. When people say, will Peyton Manning come back and work in the front office of the Colts or whatever it might be? I've always felt like part of his hesitation in doing that, amongst many things, number one, he doesn't need to do it, but seeing how John Elway's name went from being the most beloved figure in Denver sports to a polarizing one that people were calling into talk shows questioning his competency of his job before Peyton Manning came and they won a Super Bowl. But seeing how Elway's legacy and connection with the Bronco fans might have been not entirely but a little bit soured by his executive role, to me, was what Manning needed to see to say, I don't want to do that.
I think more than anything, and we discussed this just kind of BSing a little bit on the phone, I think he is just having so much fun right now, doing all the things that he's going to do and that he is doing, that I just don't think he wants that responsibility at this point. I think he's perfectly comfortable and happy. He's going to teach a little bit. He's not like he's going to be there every day and have office hours, but he's going to teach a class at Tennessee. He's got all his shows. He's got the quarterback documentary. He's got a lot of stuff going. So I don't think that he looked at John's failings as a general manager, and they did get 2 Super Bowls and win 1. But I don't think he looks at that and says, I don't need this heartache. I think he's so competitive. At some point, he may want to go back, but right now, I just don't see it. I think he's just having too good a time living his life.
Bob, did anything that Peyton said to you during that interview and conversation change your outlook or overall summarization of what's transpiring with Anthony Richardson here?
Not really. I mean, look, he was totally in favor of Anthony starting right away. I think he would have said that about any of the quarterbacks who had been selected. Now, at the time of the draft, and I don't know this because I didn't ask Peyton directly, there was talk that he was a big Levis guy. That's not to say he's down on Richardson. I think he's intrigued by this kid's massive talent and humility and his approach to the game. So I don't know. I think that he, like I say, he agrees with it, and I think he's going to stay in touch with Anthony because he knows that he's going to need that confidence built into him. He's going to have some tough moments, and I think that Peyton understands that, and I think he's going to be a good sounding board if and when Anthony needs it.
BobKravitz.substack.com is where you can read Bob Kravitz's latest, the Q&A with Peyton Manning. Bob, shifting gears a little bit within the roster, the Jonathan Taylor situation, in your opinion, by the time this situation with Jonathan Taylor is done, it will be messy enough that it needs to be cleaned up with a paper towel, a large sponge, or a wet vac?
Wet vac. Maybe Stanley Steamer. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe Stanley Steamer.
So you think it'll get that messy?
Well, I think it's already been pretty damn messy. And now, I mean, Irsay on TV the other night during the third quarter of the preseason game, I thought he tried to take the temperature down a little bit.
I'd agree. It felt like he was actually, I'm not going to say mea culpa, but he was trying to extend a little bit of an olive branch. Did I overthink that?
An olive branch. And one thing he said that was telling to me was he said, when you've been in this business for a long time, you find out that timing is everything. And what this tells me is we're about 2 weeks away from the start of the season. When it comes to this kind of nonsense, nothing happens until it has to happen. And so I think they're going to get down to brass tacks here in the next 2 weeks and decide what to do. Because, I mean, keeping him and letting him rot, while that may make you feel good, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I don't see the point. If you can trade him, get what you can, or make some kind of deal with him, doing nothing, not trading him and not paying him, I don't know what purpose that serves. They're not going to be a good team anyway. But I'll tell you what, if I want to support my rookie quarterback, I think I'd rather support him with Jonathan Taylor than, say, Jake Funk.
Do you think, Bob, that Chris Ballard, Jim Irsay, and Shane Steichen are all 100% in agreement with one another as to how to handle the Jonathan Taylor situation?
Well, I got to think as a coach. I think as a coach, you want your best players.
Right. And in Steichen's case, it's his best interest to develop Richardson and give him every tool possible, right?
Right. Exactly. So, look, does Steichen disagree with the way they're going about it? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he's a good soldier and he's just doing what he's told. But if I'm a coach, I want my best players. And Jonathan Taylor is probably your best offensive player. Not probably, definitely. So, look, this comes from up top. Irsay is fighting a bigger battle. It's kind of like when he came out and supported the idea of Dan Snyder selling the Washington football team, or whatever the hell they're called now. I think he feels like he's doing this for the other owners.
That's exactly what we were talking about. Yep.
Like, I'm not gonna reset the market here in Indianapolis for this guy and screw the rest of you guys over. Now, you could call that collusion. You could call that good business sense. I'm not sure. But I think there's a bigger purpose here for both guys, for both sides. And that's why they've both been so intractable in my view.
I actually thought Washington football team was kind of cool. I would have stuck with that over Commanders.
Soccer sound to it.
I know, but I thought it was kind of cool, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I liked it.
I got used to it, right? I got used to it. It was simplistic. The helmets were cool. I got used to it.
Yeah, no, I was fine with it. Now they're talking about bringing back the Redskins. I'm like, why don't the Indians come back and bring Chief Wahoo with them?
Yeah, Hey, how about? I mean, Bob, you want to talk about how times have changed? If you watch Henry Aaron's 715th home run, like the third person to meet him at home plate was Chief Nakahoma.
Yes.
And who's Asian, mind you, but like, I mean, all of that is like, we were doing that, really? Okay.
Yes. Not so long ago. I remember being at when the Redskins, I don't even like saying the name, but when Washington was in the Super Bowl in Minnesota, gosh, this had to be in the 80s. I remember going to talk to some members of a local tribe, and they were, if you may not remember, but they were protesting the Super Bowl and the use of Native American nicknames and everything else, and it just confirmed for me the fact that it's not like the Indianapolis Indians. I mean, Redskins to me is a pejorative.
Yeah, it's a derogatory term, right? Yeah.
Derogatory term.
Right.
What are you doing? And the same, okay, I was fine with it. I was okay with the Cleveland Indians, but Chief Wahoo, imagine doing that kind of caricature for a Jewish person or a black person or whatever. I mean, we'd all be up in arms.
Yeah.
So, I've never been a big fan of that sort of imagery.
By the way, I'll leave you with this, Bob. You mentioned the Super Bowl in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They've hosted it a couple times, I think. But I'm very proud of this trivial fun fact. You ready?
Okay.
I believe the Metrodome in Minneapolis is the only building to host a Super Bowl, a Final Four, and a World Series in the same year.
Is that right?
I'm pretty sure.
So that would have been, let's see. Might have been they were different years, you're saying. Wait, no, all in the same year.
92.
So
the 92 Final Four, which was the Duke, Michigan, Indiana, and Cincinnati. By the way, that was the first Final Four to have four defending champions in the Final Four, or four previous champions. The 92 Final Four was in Minneapolis. The 92 World Series between the Braves and the Twins obviously played in the Metrodome in Minneapolis. And I believe the January 92 Super Bowl was in – I'll have to look that up. It was either the 92 season or the January 92 Super Bowl.
And I believe that was the Mark Rippon Super Bowl. Mark Rippon won a Super Bowl.
And was a Colt, right?
Yes, he was.
He was a backup to Peyton Manning, which takes us full circle, Bob. That's what the hell we do, right?
That's a beautiful, beautiful segue.
Absolutely perfect. Bob, appreciate it on short notice, and nice job with the Peyton Manning work.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
All right, Bob Kravitz. Again, bobkravitz.substack.com, where you can read. Did you know that? Little trivia?
I did not know that fun fact.
I'm looking up now to make sure that I'm correct.
It's going to win you a bar trivia night somewhere.
Now, I know this.
Sports team.
I also know this. The Metrodome, how many buildings have hosted a Final Four and a World Series? I can think of one other one.
I would say 2 or 3.
The game played on January 26, 1992 at the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Super Bowl 36. There you go. So you got all of them in 92. You see the kind of neuroticism that you're exposed to here?
I've already learned more in one day.
What's that?
I've learned more in one day than I have last week.
Well, I'm actually quitting tomorrow, Eddie, because I've exhausted all of it. Tampa, by the way, the Tampa Bay, what is their dome in Tampa? Tropicana Field?
Yes.
Tropicana Field has hosted a World Series and a Final Four as well. There have to be others.
Yeah.
But I know that one's hosted a World Series and a Final Four. All right. We'll get back to talking about Anthony Richardson. Maybe take your calls as well on the Jonathan Taylor situation. And recapping, we haven't really gotten into kind of the positives, if you will, from the game on Saturday. So we'll do all of that here as we continue. It is Query and Company here, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. Midway through hour number 3. Typically right now it's about when I'm waking up. About 9:30 or so. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, the other voice that you're hearing on this program. Eddie Garrison is flying the commands for us today. It is Query and Company here on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan. Jimmy, your overall thoughts in the Colts preseason game number 2 against Chicago on Saturday?
I continue to be reminded that the quicker that Gardner Minshew, as tough as this is, accepts the fact that he's a quarterback 2 in the National Football League, the happier he's going to be in the NFL, and the better the chances is that he can have a meaningful impact on a franchise somewhere. Because, not to say that Ellinger wasn't fine in the reps that he got, but Minshew, again, brief sample size, very small against no Bears starters, looks calm, cool, poised like you would expect any veteran to be. And it's not going to matter this year, Jake, because the Colts aren't winning anything of substance this year, barring Anthony Richardson lighting the world on fire and them sneaking their way into the playoffs. But I enjoy reliability in my backup quarterback if I'm a real contender, just on the off chance you need a spot start or a relief move. I know it's not current Colts, like what's going to matter this season, but Minshew is reliability, and that's nice to have regardless of how this season goes.
I think with Minshew, what's really fascinating, Jimmy, life's about timing sometimes. And, there are a lot of people in the world that maybe they're doing a job that they weren't supposed to initially do, or maybe they are doing a job that is well below what they're capable of doing, but it came down to timing for them. And in Gardner Minshew's case, I think his ability as a contributor on the field for the Colts is going to be about the timing of Anthony Richardson. And by that, I mean, Minshew is not a guy that they're going to have long-term theoretically. Maybe Minshew is seeing this opportunity as a chance to continue to show what he is capable of doing in hopes that still another team signs him to be their guy, right? Or maybe he becomes a Ryan Fitzpatrick and just a journeyman guy that is really capable. He's a good player. I don't think anybody can deny that. But he's only 27. And I think he has played well. He probably does play a little bit different style than Richardson. But if theoretically Anthony Richardson, let's say Anthony Richardson, for whatever reason, has an Andrew Luck type, maybe not year 1, but in year 2. And suddenly, it all comes together for him, and Alec Pierce develops, and Josh Downs develops, and Pittman gets signed, and that now all of a sudden they've got something, right?
Got a word chatter going on for Anthony Richardson.
What's that?
Got a ward chatter going on, like right. Sniffing Pro Bowls, perhaps,
right.
and being
he's showing progress, right?
Yes, yeah.
So if that's the case, and if suddenly it puts the Colts in position, and I'm not talking about this year, but if it puts Colts in an eventual position where they are a wild card contender or better within their division, and the division's going to be tough because theoretically or seemingly Jacksonville ain't going anywhere anytime soon. But if it were the case that things fell that way for them, then Minshew becomes really important, because if you've got a guy like Richardson that is big and seemingly durable, but if he's doing draws and he's running plays and whatever else, and he has tendency to miss a game or two, Gardner Minshew, Jimmy, absolutely looks like a guy that if you can put him in for 2 or 3 games is going to win you 2 or 3 of them, right?
Yeah.
And keep you afloat. Matt Hasselbeck Ryan Grigson caught a lot of heat for a lot of reasons as a general manager here. One of the things he did do that was a real positive was when he signed Matt Hasselbeck, because Luck was injury prone, and at that time you were still trying to keep afloat for when Luck would come back, and Hasselbeck played well for them and won them some games. But the longer that you had to go that route, the more water finds its level.
Yes.
But Minshew absolutely looks like a guy that can keep you afloat for a while there, right?
Yes. The spot starter guy you can go to for a handful of games, 2 or 3 games.
So that would be positive number 1. As I mentioned to Bob, I think positive number 2 is they were able to run Ellinger in particular with some designed running quarterback plays. That's good news for Richardson.
Yes.
And good news for fans, right? Because I think Richardson's going to be interesting to watch in that regard.
Yep.
The question is, can he do anything other than run, and then throw the ball 80 yards.
Yeah.
Right? The funny thing is Gardner Minshew's the one that everybody says looks like Uncle Rico, but Richardson is the one that, like, right now his one selling feature is he can throw a football over the mountains, right?
That's it, yeah.
I mean, that's it, right? You need him to hit one from, like, from 10 feet away, he's Napoleon Dynamite.
Yeah.
You just never know.
Yep.
I thought, for the most part, the offensive line played well, considering that's your backup line. So I think you did see some guys that showed that they can provide some depth in that area.
What frustrated me on that same stance, though, is I thought they played well enough and they were able to execute those type of either rollouts or design runs with Ehlinger, where it's that now gets removed off my list of reasonable reasons for why Anthony Richardson didn't play in that football game.
Right. Fair. Very good point. In other words, if that line had been a sieve, then you'd say, well, that's why they didn't start him, because they were trying to protect
I get it.
him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But maybe they didn't know, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Maybe it was not a dice roll, but just an evaluation guess. And if he plays against Philadelphia, I'm not going to say, like, all is forgiven, but grand scheme of things, it's one preseason game. Like, is it going to make or break his development? No. I'm laying the pros and cons of why you don't put him out there. The Bears aren't playing their ones defensively. You don't have your starting offensive line. You're going with a depth move on the O-line. Don't want to risk bad habits, but it was Ehlinger's experience in the league enough to move the needle where he can handle it, but Richardson can't? I mean, is that the takeaway from the Colts front office perspective of why you hold him out?
Yeah, I mean, again, I go back to, Jimmy, I think the holding him out, they're going to do what they think's their best approach, and only they know, right?
Yeah. And if he plays all 17, it doesn't matter. Like that's going to be plenty of film and reps to go off of and see, hey, this is what you have, this is what you don't have.
We were talking earlier about stadiums, about classic rock.
Yep.
Like, how long do you give it before, like, the label sticks? With stadiums, how long does a stadium have to be outdated and lame before it becomes cool and nostalgic? And with quarterbacks, how long do they have to show potential before you finally say, okay, we're done with potential and now we need reality? How long are they going to give him? 2 years? 3 years? Who knows, right?
Yep.
I mean, if Vince Young was fascinating to me, because when I remember Vince Young, the first or second year that he was in Tennessee, and Bob Lamey, the then voice of the Colts, saying, like, this guy's going to be a problem for a long time. And I think everybody thought that. I mean, when Vince Young took over in Tennessee, he was a handful. He was a problem. But, of course, then I think teams figured out how to play Vince Young, and he didn't figure out how to adjust to that. And so once it went south, it fell off a cliff. But at what point did they say, like, okay, we now know that it's not going to come back and we've got to move on? And with Richardson, if you are, Vince Young could extend plays with his legs, and so that maybe made him a little bit deceptive. But once teams figured out how to, well, hey, listen, if we can close those lanes and then he's got to throw, then we got advantage.
Yep.
And is that what teams are going to do to Richardson? I mean, I would assume that that's what they're going to do to him. But, Jimmy, to your point, when he plays 17 games, if he stays healthy, that's more – teams are not looking – the Colts can look at those 17 games and look at it for reasons to validate taking Anthony Richardson within the top 10 of the draft. Other teams are going to look at those 17 games to find every single nuance as to how to shut him down.
Are the Colts in a better, worse, or the same position than the Chicago Bears were 4 years ago, in your mind?
Probably the same.
That's what I would say, too.
Yeah. Although I do think the Bears had some pretty decent – I'd say the same.
I mean, they what? The double doink, like, yeah, there's a window 5 or 6 years ago where you're having conversations about Trubisky and Matt Nagy and what's going to happen there. But, yeah, I would say probably about the same. We had Courtney Cronin on Friday, and she stressed that it is a situation-by-situation basis to answer that question of how long do you give a quarterback. This is what, year 3 for Fields? This is it. This is modern NFL thought, 3 years, and then maybe it's time to move on. It's a different dynamic for the Bears because they didn't draft Fields, that current front office that's there. So how much obligation do they really have? But to answer your question, in my mind, it's 2 or 3 seasons to find a real answer. And even then, maybe it's too soon, but to find a real answer in today's NFL of we need to move on, or is this guy growing into something we can build around continually?
So everybody has that buddy that when you were in college would occasionally go out with some smoking hot chick. And like she was totally flaky, and every 10 times he'd call, she'd actually answer. And every 5 times they made plans, she'd actually follow through and they'd go out. And you're like, dude, why are you putting up with this? And he's like, yeah, but you see how hot she is. I mean, like when I walked into the restaurant with her, like, and I went to that party with her. Remember the Halloween party we went to? And I mean, now you understand why I put up with it, right?
Sure.
Justin Fields, I'm going to use him as an example. I was watching a game last year. It was towards the end of the season, broken play, and he starts running. And he goes to his left, stops to pass, no coverage, breaks to his right. Again, he's looking, he's waving guys down the field. He looks like Carlton Fisk in Game 6. Nothing's opening up. Finally, he just decides to tuck it and run. And he's running in one direction, and the lanes are closing, and he cuts back across the field, and he finds an opening, and he's on the sideline, and he's just gone. And I mean, you're like, and that's the thing. Players like that have that unique ability to be able to turn every head when they walk into the Halloween party are the reasons why you keep sticking with it.
Sure.
Because they show you enough where you're like, man, it is hard to just bail on that. And I do think Richardson has that capability, and that's why he is where he is. The problem is, can you withstand? Can you ride out? Can you be patient with the rest of it?
Unless there's a better-looking girl calling you, which were the Bears, it's Caleb Williams potentially next year.
Well, that's true. And
that's why I'm saying year 3, like,
Jamie,
depending on how bad things are.
How about this?
Maybe you're turning tides.
What about this? Colts go. I don't think this is going to happen. Colts go 3-14. Colts have the number 1 pick in the draft. Anthony Richardson showed great promise, but they were 3-14. Caleb Williams is sitting right there. Do you pull a Josh Rosen, send it out and do it all over again after 1 year, or do you trade the pick to somebody that needs Caleb Williams and load up on a king's ransom?
I'm going to answer this question for the comedic way. That's the path I'm taking. Trade back a couple spots to get draft capital and then draft Marvin Harrison Jr. because that's what, for the sake of chaos, I want Jim Irsay to do next year in the draft. But for the interest of this exercise, I'd be very tempted to take the pick.
Can you imagine if they did exactly that and then the team that they traded
took Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Took Marvin Harrison Jr. That would be like totally par for the course, would it not?
Yes, it would.
Totally par for the course. We'll come back and put a bow tie on all of it. This is the Monday edition of Query and Company. You're listening to it on 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
Final time on a Monday. Inaugural edition, Query and Company. Jimmy Cook, the title named Jay Query, Eddie Garrison with us as well.
I feel very uncomfortable with that, by the way.
Which part? The introduction as a whole? The fact that your name is directly tied to a show with a company crew?
Just say, hey, it's Jimmy. I'm here with Jake. How's that?
Okay.
It works for me.
I mean, I'm put my feet up. We'll go with that.
The Jays.
What's that?
The Jays.
J squared.
There you go. Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, one of the most popular places to go in the summer was 3J, which later became Thunder Island. But they had a go-kart track, water slides, and driving range. It's right by Grand Park. And I think now, finally, they're developing something there. But a couple of years ago, my buddy Greg Bell and I, in the middle of the winter one time, got bored and just drove over and tried to find it. And it's in like the one undeveloped area of land in the Carmel Westfield area.
Sure.
And you kind of went through these woods, and then boom, there was like the remnants of the water slides, the go-kart, all of it. Like the skeleton of it.
Sure.
You're going to laugh when I say this. It was eerie. It was like eerie to be like, oh my gosh, like there's the top of the water slide. You could see the go-kart track with like weeds growing through it. The putt-putt range still had, you know how if you play putt-putt, there's always like a hole that has like a tube. You hit it and it goes in that. Like some of those tubes were still laying around. The actual holes themselves were all 18 of them were laid out. It was weird, man.
I don't know if they have torn it completely down because I haven't been to that particular juncture of Southport Road in a minute. But the putt-putt course that I would go play at all the time was putt-putt golf on Southport Road. And then it, went a disarray and was sold. And now I think last time I saw it, it was a used car lot, but they still had the steps of putt-putt. Same thing. Not quite a woods with a haunted manor type feel that you
like
had.
When you buy a car, do you have to drive it through the gorilla's legs on your way out? I always wondered this about putt-putt. So putt-putt is putt-putt still a thing?
It's not called putt-putt anymore, but there are putt-putt courses.
Well, I know there's miniature golf, but I'm saying like the franchise putt-putt.
Not
putt,
here.
Putt for the fun of it. Putt for the fun of it. So there used to be putt-putts everywhere. And now, I mean, I know that like Birdies, I went to Birdies a couple weeks ago. It was fun, miniature golf. But when you would play, when I was a kid, you'd go to the putt-putt course and they would announce.
Yes.
Now, if you just got a hole-in-one with a green ball, come up and turn it in for a free round of putt-putt. Yep. And I look back on it now and I'm like, why would anybody who had a green ball not just go up there and be like, yeah, I just got a hole-in-one, right? Like, what kind of honesty policy were we on? Was this the precursor to the self-checkout at the grocery store? Like, they were very trusting of me, right?
It's an honor system. Come on.
I guess, and I was obviously an honorable kid, but I look back on it now and I think to myself, like, what kind of, I mean, I guess they were instilling scruples in me, which is impressive, but I loved putt-putt as a kid.
As did I.
No, when did the one in Southport close, would you guess?
If I was to guess, I would say somewhere between 2008 and 2010, somewhere around there. I could be way off on that, but post 2008. Got to remember you're sitting next to a 95er here, and so that throughout my childhood,
fair enough.
I do remember that putt-putt very close to where my dad worked, so I always would enjoy a nice round there. Get your name announced on a hole-in-one, because I was an honest kid like you.
Honesty is the best policy, Jimmy. You know, when Live Golf came about, I had a kind of a hair on fire theory that I threw out on the radio. And I mean, my theories and my conspiracy theories on radio, I'm probably, I don't know. I mean, I'm probably about like Dale Davis shooting threes in terms of my accuracy rate. But I remember saying with Live Golf what I didn't know this for certain, but I wondered aloud if the Live Golf thing for the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, PIF, if that wasn't their test balloon of introducing themselves to the American sports culture to see what other things they could perhaps divvy into. And basically put their money into, because they have you're talking about with Saudi Arabian money, I mean, it's endless, right?
Yes.
And so at that time, I remember saying, could they go after other stars? Could they go after other sports? The one that was intriguing to me, and I know this is crazy, but the one that was intriguing to me was the NFL, because there's already a rival league, not rival, there's already a professional league in place that is, and now in the USFL or the XFL, either one. What would have stopped the Saudi money from saying, okay, Caleb Williams, we're going to pay you $35 million a year to play for the Birmingham Stallions. Now you laugh. Right? You laugh.
No, but I mean, it's not totally implausible, but the idea of him playing for the Birmingham Stallions makes me laugh. Yes.
Understood. But at the same time, in 1984, the idea of Herschel Walker signing with the USFL was ridiculous. Or Doug Flutie was ridiculous.
Sure.
Or Kelvin Bryant was ridiculous. Or Reggie White was ridiculous. Or Jim Kelly was ridiculous. But money talks, right? So I don't think that would happen, because I think that they are smart enough to not mess with the NFL. But did you see now that Giannis, and I think he was saying it flippantly, but Giannis made insinuation or joke about the possibility of the Saudis and an NBA league, a professional basketball league in Saudi Arabia, saying like, hey, after the NBA, sure, I would absolutely play in Saudi Arabia for the right amount of money. If the NBA worked out maybe like a trade between the NBA and Saudi Arabian League, I'm there, he said. Now, I'm sure he's being flippant, okay? And he's joked in the past about going to Saudi Arabia for, like, massive contracts. But I'm telling you, like...
It's already happening in soccer.
Right.
Cristiano Ronaldo,
Correct.
Neymar just did it, like, a week or two ago.
Correct.
It's not totally improbable.
So when with the live golf thing, I genuinely was curious as to whether or not that was Saudi Arabia sending their test balloon, letting professional sports teams in the United States know they're open for business.
Dipping their toe in the water.
Right.
And further solidified, at least for some of those that maybe are fearful of that happening, when the PGA basically raises their hand up like they just won a prize fight, that, hey, they're part of us now.
And look at a guy like Giannis. He's won a title. And in addition to that, I mean, he's not an American. Like, for him, playing in Saudi Arabia, if it were, or, wherever a league would be that they're...
He has no obligation.
Correct.
No. Yeah.
Like, I'm telling you, money talks. Like, I know this sounds crazy, and it probably 99% chance nothing comes of any of this, and probably it was all just a joke, right?
Sure.
But if you look at the fact that when the Saudi money started Live Golf, everybody laughed at it. Oh, they don't even have a TV contract. These guys are fools. Give me a break. They got no chance. And then what happens? All of a sudden, within not even a year, there's a merger because the PGA was smart enough to know, like, listen, we got a tiger by the tail here, right?
Yep. Get beat or join them.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds weird, but like...
It might not have played out right away, but that was the long-term financial battle, trying to go up against their fund. And it's a losing battle if you're trying to fight that kind of money.
By the way, Ryan Walter is going to join John here in about 35 minutes, the new Purdue coach, among other things. I'm sure they have plenty to talk about. JMV has just walked into the studio. It looks like he just stepped off the basketball court. Did you run over here?
I did not. No. Did you see that picture of that big black snake in my backyard there? See that? No?
Yeah, boy.
No.
This wasn't venomous, was it?
No, man. They help out, man. They keep varmints out.
I like
Moles,
varmints.
mice,
I like chipmunks.
Huh?
Chipmunks are cool.
Yeah, sometimes they can be. But what would you do if you had this is probably 4 feet long, huge.
Sheesh.
Would you let her run? Because I let him go. He's been there for like 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a snake. Snakes terrify me.
I mean, I'm not a reptile person either, but...
If I knew with confidence it wasn't poisonous, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, he wasn't. He was just hanging out. He actually... You got to check out... Watch it on Twitter. He was watching me mow. It's pretty cool. He just hey, can you hustle up here? Because I got a mole to get.
I think we're up against it, John.
Well done. Great day. Are you coming on with me later?
Huh?
Are you coming on with me later?
I don't know. Am I? I don't see my name on the board. We're already over. You want me to just stick around?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, look, Eddie's over there giving you a time. I don't give a crap about the time. Come on, man.
If you can't tell by now, Eddie Garrison's wrapping us. Jimmy, we'll see you tomorrow, all right?
Sounds
JMV's
good.
up next.
The Ride with JMV.